Chapter 1248. It seems like I was wrong. He is the most talented frost dragon in the history of the frost dragon tribe. Jinx looked up at the frost dragon that was spewing blue flames as it flew away. He lamented, he has actually evolved into a fire-breathing dragon. Although the other frost dragons did not drink the soup base, a cloud of white smoke rose from their heads, and their snow-white bodies turned pink. All of them stared at Jinx with their red eyes. Jinx, don't you golden dragons take advantage of us. The frost dragons are not people you can touch as you wish. You'd better not cross the line. We frost dragons will not tolerate being bullied by other dragons. The frost dragon old man snorted coldly, spread his wings, and was about to lead the other two frost dragons away. Wait a minute. You haven't settled the bill. Right at this moment, a weak voice sounded. Settle the bill. The dragons looked around, and finally lowered their heads to see Anna, who was holding a small ledger in her hand. Anna took half a step back instinctively after being glared at by everyone. However, she still looked up, and said, each of you ordered 10 sets of dishes and a set of insanely spicy soup base. The total cost is 200,400 copper coins. 4 chairs were damaged, and we will compensate you according to the cost of each chair at 500 copper coins. You will have to pay a total of 22,400 copper coins. Why is there so much? Are you trying to extort us? A frost dragon stared at Anna with its large eyes, its massive body casting a huge shadow over her. Every dish on the menu has a price. There are a total of 50 dishes. You can count them yourself. Anna took out the bill and raised it above her head. Although she was a little scared, she did not back down at all. The giant dragon's eyes swept across the zeros, and he felt dizzy. This was not a problem that he could solve. Pay up for your meal, or I will kill you all. Right at this moment, Amy walked past from behind with her magic caster's staff in her arms, and mumbled something. The frost dragon shuddered as it recalled Fox's example. It immediately took out its money pouch, counted enough dragon crystals, and placed them on the table. It then flew away with the other 2 frost dragons in a sorry state. Jinx and the rest were almost done eating, and took the initiative to settle the bill. They looked at Harrison, who was slumped on the chair with a satisfied expression, and said with surprise, "Little fatty, you're not that big, but you have quite a big appetite." Burp. Harrison let out a long burp and heaved a sigh of relief. He helplessly said, "I ordered too much, but I didn't want to waste it, so I could only stuff myself with it." At this time, the restaurant was about to close. The designated hot pot area was no longer receiving customers. Some customers who were full were not in a hurry to leave. They sat and chatted, letting their stomachs digest for a while. Otherwise, they would not be able to walk at all. Jinx and the rest rested for a while before they transformed back into their human forms. They were not in a hurry to leave. They chatted softly for a while, and their gazes were fixed on Yabamiya, who was clearing the table. However, they did not disturb him abruptly. Did these fellows still find out? Elizabeth frowned. Although the Golden Dragon tribe treated their tribesmen very well, she did not want to let Mia go to the Golden Dragon Island alone now. No matter how beautiful a place was described, there was still a dark side. The Golden Dragon Island was also a place where the strong were respected. In this world, Mia would definitely encounter some unfair treatment if she went alone. Mia also felt the few golden dragons staring at her. She learned a lot of information about her father from Elizabeth. Their grandmother was from the Golden Dragon tribe, so she was different from Elizabeth and had the Golden Dragon bloodline. Also, when she saw them transform because of the hot pot, it was the same as her usual transformation. She was indeed a golden dragon. Unlike Fox and the other frost dragons who were full of hostility, she felt some goodwill from these golden dragons. Now that they had stayed behind and were chatting at the side instead of leaving, some strange thoughts appeared in her mind. These fellows want to domesticate Mia. After cooking the last dish, Meg came out of the kitchen, and saw Jinx and the rest who had not left. His eyes narrowed slightly. Meg already knew that Yabamia and Elizabeth were sisters. When he was reading the information about the dragons yesterday, he saw the portrait of Rankster, who had left a deep mark in the history of the Golden Dragon Island. It was almost the same as the portrait of her father that the system had drawn for Mia that day. From Elizabeth's behavior, he could confirm that they had already acknowledged each other. It was just that they did not announce it to the public, so he pretended not to know. This also explained very well why Elizabeth was willing to entrust herself to Yabamia when she was on the verge of death. Although they had the same father but different mothers, they were ultimately sisters, and the only family they had in this world. Therefore, although Mia had always wanted to look for her father, she could not find him even if she went to the Golden Dragon Island. When the sisters reunited, Elizabeth rejected the Frost Dragon's apology and the Golden Dragon's invitation. No one knew what choice Mia would make. From Meg's selfish point of view, he naturally hoped that Mia could stay. He would never be able to find such an obedient and sensible employee who did so much but ate so little. However, going to the Golden Dragon Island might be a whole new world for Mia. She was no longer the inferior half-dragon who was bullied by the black-hearted boss and fainted in front of the restaurant. She was now a pure-blooded golden dragon who had inherited Rankster's talent. She had a bright future ahead of her. It was indeed a waste for her to continue working as a waitress in the restaurant. Meg was happy for Mia's growth, but he also felt the melancholy of an old father who was worried that his child would leave him when she grew up. Looking at Jinx and the rest who still had the mood to chat, he suddenly regretted not adding 2 more spoonfuls of the perverted chili powder for them. Then, they would be able to go home with blue flames. After the customers left, everyone quickly tidied up the restaurant and prepared to leave. "Hello, young lady. Can we talk to you?" Jinx and the rest finally walked up to Mia and tried their best to smile kindly. What do you want to talk about?" Mia asked softly as she moved closer to Elizabeth subconsciously. "We are golden dragons from the Golden Dragon Island, and you are one of us. Therefore, we would like to invite you to return to the Golden Dragon Island and officially become a member of the Golden Dragon tribe." Jinx looked at Yabamia and sincerely said, "Your bloodline is very pure. You will receive the best cultivation resources on the Golden Dragon Island and receive the teachings of powerhouses. You will be able to grow into a powerhouse in no time." Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 1249. What tempting conditions. If a normal wandering dragon were to suddenly have a big boss tell you that you are a genius after wandering outside for more than a decade, and now we are going to bring you home, give you a luxurious car and a mansion, and even give you the best teachers to make you a big boss, probably not many people would be able to withstand that. Everyone looked at Mia with some reluctance. Could it be that they were going to lose another little friend? Elizabeth also looked at Mia. She didn't ask Mia to do anything just now. Going to Golden Dragon Island might bring more challenges, but it was indeed a shortcut to becoming a powerhouse. The powerful Golden Dragon Senior could give Mia more guidance, and some of the holy lands on Golden Dragon Island were also more suitable for Mia to cultivate. "Is Big Sister Mia leaving?" Amy grabbed Meg's hand and was a little reluctant. Big Sister Mia was too good to her, and she couldn't bear for her to leave. Meg didn't say anything. He respected Mia's choice. This was also his promise to them when they first entered the restaurant. Yabamia wasn't an ordinary wandering dragon, after all, because she was adopted midway. "But I like being a service staff member at Mamie's. I like it here, and I want to continue staying here. I don't want to go to Dragon Island." Mia looked at Jinx and shook her head to reject without any hesitation. You want to continue being a service staff member and not go back to Golden Dragon Island to become a powerhouse. Jinx felt that he had heard wrongly, so he repeated his question. Yes, I want to stay at Mamie's. Mia nodded firmly. What's so good about this restaurant? You can't become a powerhouse if you stay here, and it will be a waste of your talent. If you go to Golden Dragon Island, you will be able to grow very quickly, and you might even become the chief of the Golden Dragons. Isn't that better than being a service staff member at this restaurant? Jinx was puzzled. He couldn't understand why Mia would make such a choice. You can eat the most delicious food in the world for free in this restaurant, but there's none on Golden Dragon Island. The restaurant has the best boss in the world, the best companions in the world, and the 2 cutest babies in the world. Golden Dragon Island doesn't have that. The restaurant can receive all kinds of guests every day. You can listen to their stories that happened all over the continent. You can't hear them on Golden Dragon Island. Besides, I'm not only a waiter at Mamie's, but I'm also the manager of an ice cream shop. The children are still waiting for me to open the shop and make ice cream for them every day. If I leave, they will definitely be very sad. But if I don't go to Golden Dragon Island, no one will be sad. Yabamiya explained clearly. Jinx opened his mouth and thought for a long while, but he was actually at a loss for words. Yabamiya bowed to Jinx and sincerely said, "Thank you for treating me as one of your people, but I just want to stay in Amy's with Boss and my adorable companions." What an obedient and adorable child. Jinx's feelings were very complicated. It was naturally a very good thing to bring home a child with extraordinary talent, but seeing how obedient Mia was, he couldn't say anything harsh. After hesitating for a long time, he took out a jade tablet and passed it to Mia. This is a cultivation technique of the Golden Dragon tribe. Take it back and take a look. If there's anything you don't understand, just ask me when I come to the restaurant for a meal. Thank you. Mia received the jade tablet with both hands and bowed deeply to Jinx. She knew from Elizabeth that cultivation techniques were precious. Because Elizabeth was learning the cultivation technique of the Ice Empress Dragon tribe, it wasn't suitable for her. So, she hadn't started cultivating yet, and only learned flying and some combat skills. Elizabeth also looked at the jade tablet in Mia's hand with surprise. The cultivation technique of a tribe was very precious. She didn't expect Jinx to give it to Mia just like that. In that case, Mia would have a suitable cultivation technique to cultivate. And nothing. Jinx scratched his head, and then looked at Elizabeth, and said, "Miss Elizabeth, if you change your mind, you can tell me anytime. The Golden Dragon tribe welcomes you." After saying that, Jinx transformed into a giant dragon and left with the other 3 giant dragons. "Jinx, this isn't in line with the rules, right?" a giant dragon asked after flying out of Chaos City. "Yes. She's not willing to go to Golden Dragon Island, and she hasn't officially become one of us. You might be punished if the elders find out that you've imparted the cultivation technique to her rashly," another giant dragon said worriedly. "Then, what should we do? We can't just watch such a good seedling waste her time outside and be bullied because she doesn't have the ability, right?" "That's not the style of the Golden Dragon tribe," Jinx retorted. All the giant dragons were silent. That was also the reason why they didn't stop him directly. "I will personally report this matter to the elders. I believe that the elders will agree with my actions. As for why she doesn't want to leave that restaurant, it's indeed very difficult to escape from Mr. Mac's clutches after eating such delicious food. However, a human's lifespan is only 100 years. To us, 100 years is just a short period of time. When those humans gradually die off, she will naturally return to the dragon tribe," Jinx said with a smile. However, when he thought about how he might not be able to eat such delicious food again after 100 years, he felt a little melancholic. Big sister Mia, you're not leaving. That's great. Amy jumped into Mia's arms and kissed her on the cheek happily. I thought you were going to leave suddenly like them. Oh. Barbara shrugged. Her face was expressionless, but she was obviously relieved. Big sister Mia is also the most adorable person, Anna said with a smile. Her eyes were a little red. Of course I can't bear to leave all of you. I want to be with all of you forever. I want to stay in the restaurant forever. I have endless delicious food, and all of you are the best. Mia kissed Amy on the cheek and patted Anna's head. Then, she gave everyone an energetic smile. Meg's face was also full of smiles. This was probably the most perfect outcome. It didn't delay Mia's cultivation, and she didn't have to leave. Alright, everyone's workload has doubled today. It's been hard on you. Go back and have a good rest. I will put up a recruitment notice in the next few days to recruit a few more employees for the restaurant. That way, everyone won't be so busy, Meg said to everyone. That's great. Gina still has some difficulty communicating with the customers. It would be perfect if we could have one or two more colleagues to help serve the dishes, Mia said with a smile. Father, are you looking for a few more beautiful ladies? Amy asked excitedly. Oh. Chapter 1250. Meg used a very serious tone to explain to Amy the difference between a waitress and a normal lady, as well as the difference between looking for a waitress for the restaurant and looking for a lady for himself. But the restaurant is yours, Amy said seriously. There was a sudden silence, and everyone was looking at Meg with a weird gaze. Alright, let's disperse. Go home and sleep. Meg waved his hand calmly, not wanting to argue with the children. After the crowd dispersed, Amy followed Meg into the restaurant. She still asked curiously, what kind of waitress should we look for this time? I have a big sister elf, a big sister mermaid, a big sister dragon, a big sister moon, a big sister orc, and a big sister bat. What else can I find? We can also get a troll sister, a gnome sister, and a dwarf sister. Anna said after some serious thought. Meg stopped in his tracks and thought about it seriously. He quickly rejected the suggestion. He could not get the looks of the three races. Dwarves were limited by their height, so it was not easy for them to complete the restaurant's work. Trolls, on the other hand, had to eat outside the restaurant due to their huge size, let alone be waitresses. As for the gnomes, Meg only had the image of green goblins in his mind. Although some of the gnomes he had seen recently had different skin types and not only had green skin, because they had lived in the underground caverns for a long time, they always had a sickly feeling. Moreover, because they were too thin and weak, they looked like they were just skin and bones. With their aesthetic standards, they would not be suitable candidates for waitresses. Anyway, we have so many customers. Let's put up an announcement and slowly choose. Meg smiled and shook his head. He did not let the two clever little imps continue to come up with ideas. Alright, then let's help Sister Gina clean up the eggshells. Amy walked toward Gina, who was sorting out the mud shells of the beggar's chicken that the customers had eaten today. I'll go too. Gina jogged over. Every night, Gina would spend some time sorting out the mud shells into individually packaged small portions. One portion was enough for one of her clansmen to break free from the curse. After this period of testing, she had already experimented with a standard dosage. A beggar's chicken's mud shell could lift the curse for 5 clansmen. In order to make it easier for her to measure, Meg bought her an electronic scale and a batch of plastic bags from the system, so the sorting work became more efficient. With the help of Meg and the rest, Gina only used a dozen minutes to distribute all the mud casings. Thank you. She kissed Amy and Anna before giving Meg a big hug. You're not allowed to raise your legs next time. Meg helplessly put down Gina's long legs that were wrapped around him naturally. Everything about Gina was good except for this habit of hers. If Irina were to see this in the future, he would never be able to clear his name. Yes. Gina stuck out her tongue embarrassedly. She used the crystal ball to store the separated mud casings. She looked at Meg and asked expectantly, "Mr. Meg, can I participate in the battle the day after tomorrow?" "If you want to participate, you can come along too." Meg nodded. Gina was not a brainless, big-breasted vase. She had the ability of an eighth tier. Although the former was also valid, it would be more or less a form of deterrence if she came along. Also, with her around, it would be easier to communicate with Lantist. All right. Gina smiled sweetly. She also wanted to fight with everyone. After washing up the two little fellows, Meg lay on the bed and told them a story. Amy had already fallen asleep, but Anna was still looking at Meg with her eyes wide open. "Anna, do you still not want to sleep?" Meg asked Anna. "Uncle Meg, can I go with everyone?" Anna asked softly. She pursed her lips and hesitated. "I miss Sister Shirley and Sister Gina." Meg looked at Anna, and his heart ached. Shirley and Gina were the ones who saved her from those baddies, and she lived with Shirley for a period of time. After being separated for a period of time, it was normal for her to miss them. However, he was not sure if the battle the day after tomorrow would turn into a chaotic battle. In the chaos, even he could not guarantee that he would be able to protect Anna, who had no ability to protect herself. "If it's not convenient, then I won't go." "As long as you can save Sister Shirley and the rest," Anna quickly said. She lowered her head as if she had done something wrong. "Anna, I know you miss them a lot, and you want to see them too." Meg patted Anna's head gently, and said in a gentle voice, "However, we're most likely going to face a very intense battle the day after tomorrow. There are many bad guys, and they're all very powerful. Everyone has to devote themselves to the battle, so I'm afraid I won't be able to take you with me this time." Anna nodded obediently. She looked up at Meg. "Then, you must be careful too. Don't worry. We will help them out successfully. They will be fine." Meg nodded with a smile, and said, "So, our little Anna has to sleep well too. When I see Shirley, I will ask her to come back and visit you." Anna nodded with a smile on her face, and closed her eyes obediently. Meg got up, switched off the warm light at the head of the bed, and went out softly. He was not in a hurry to sleep. Instead, he went into the study, took out the information about the elves, and started reading it seriously again. The day after tomorrow, they would be facing a battle with an extremely unequal number of people. Although Lantist had a strong army of powerhouses, there were still many unknowns when it came to fighting on land. He had to make full use of those 15 minutes of peak time. The target of his attack and the extent to which he had to do all had to be calculated and analyzed. "Elizabeth. I will tear you into pieces." In a valley, Fox, who had transformed into a 100-meter-long giant dragon, was lying on the edge of a cliff, and roaring with gritted teeth. "PFFF. PFFF, again." Accompanied by two strange sounds, Fox's expression changed drastically. The 100-meter-long giant frost dragon transformed into a blue fire jet fighter, and collided wildly in the valley. Finally, it fell into the valley dejectedly. Rodu, the royal palace's bedroom. The king turned his head to look at the queen who was tossing and turning in bed, and consoled her. "Don't worry. Vanessa is with Abraham now. He will look after her. Also, I have sent people to protect her. No one can hurt her. Your Majesty, this lass has never been to such a far place before. Furthermore, she has left the Empire's borders. What should we do if she meets with bad people, or if something happens to her. The queen was still depressed. She could not wait to fly over and bring Vanessa back. Vanessa brushed her teeth as she looked at Laura with a blissful smile on her face, and said, "Today's hot pot was so delicious. Let's have hot pot again tomorrow." Chapter 1251. This idiot is so childish that he wants to fight against the army of the Wind Forest, and he even wants to drag everyone in the restaurant with him. Isn't he in a hurry to die? On the branch of a big tree, Camilla raised her head and took a big gulp of wine. She exhaled a mouthful of white smoke, and there was a trace of impatience and melancholy in her eyes. "Madam, Miss Gloria is bathing." At this moment, Caesar suddenly called out softly. "Where?" Camilla, who was originally sitting on the branch, instantly changed to hang upside down. She stared at the small window with the dim yellow light. Rip! Before she could see anything clearly, the curtains were pulled closed. "It's gone," Caesar said helplessly. "Life is really boring. When will Miss Gloria understand my feelings for her? What's so good about men? Lesbians are the king." Camilla sat back on the branch again, and took a big gulp of wine. She was a little melancholy. "Madam, if we go north and participate in that matter, will it affect the vampires?" Caesar asked Camilla. "Even if they know, it doesn't matter. When have the elves ever liked us demons? It's quite interesting to annoy those guys from the Wind Forest." Camilla pursed her lips, and her expression became a little strange. "But when I think about how we are going to save that woman, Irina, I feel a little uncomfortable. Why don't we not go?" Caesar was also a little trembling. Irina's notoriety was like thunder to the ears on the Demon Islands. When the demon mothers met their children who didn't sleep in the middle of the night, they would say, "If you cry again, Irina will come and take you away." Such a great demon king actually needed them to save him now. This feeling was indeed a little strange. Escape. That's not my character. Camilla's face was full of pride. She spread out her hands and turned into a huge black bat, flying into the dark night and disappearing without a trace. A qualified killer won't do such a childish thing as making faces behind the target. The opportunity to assassinate is always in an instant. If you don't seize this opportunity, you will be the one to die, Rex said seriously as he reached out and pulled out Connie, who was making faces behind him. "Master, how did you see me?" "I was invisible." Connie, who was wearing a set of tight black clothes, was grabbed by the collar. She was shocked. If it's only this level of concealment, any grade 7 person can sense your location. Rex put Connie on the ground, and reached out 2 fingers to pinch the slender and long dagger that sneakily poked out of her sleeves. Connie uses exaggerated expressions to attract the opponent's attention, and it's fatal for killers. "But I really can't learn how to pretend to be someone else." Connie put away her dagger, looking distressed. For the past few days, other than learning concealment and assassination techniques from her master, she also had to learn how to become different characters in different environments. The first 2 were still okay. With her outstanding talent, she improved very quickly. But when it came to role-playing, she was completely hopeless. She could only act as herself. Rex stared at Connie seriously for a while, then he suddenly laughed out loud. "Master, what are you laughing at? Although I'm a little stupid, you can't laugh at me." Connie blinked, and felt wronged. Rex shook his head, and said with a smile, "When I was learning how to act as someone else, I couldn't learn how to become someone else either. Because of my personality and that iconic bald head and eyes, I was easily noticed no matter where I was." Connie looked at Rex's head, which had grown hair, and asked curiously, "Then how did you learn it?" "I chose to give up." Rex shook his head, "But I still became the best assassin." I don't need to disguise myself, and I rarely even need to conceal myself. As long as I want to kill someone, I can kill them. In front of absolute power, any disguise and concealment are superfluous. Connie looked at Rex, who was looking at the starry sky at a 45-degree angle, and said with a complicated expression, "Master, you're exaggerating." Ahem. Rex coughed dryly, and looked at Connie. He said with some emotion, "You're the first assassin I've met who can't disguise because you're not smart enough. This kind of situation is really rare. You're also the first person I've met who can turn an assassin into a warrior because you don't have hair." Connie also had a complicated expression. The two of them looked at each other in silence, and then laughed at the same time. "The blood of the hunting cat flows in your body. I thought it was just a legend, but the power of the totem has really manifested in your body, so you have a very good concealment talent. You can hide your breath and voice to a great extent. This is what you rely on to become the best assassin, but it won't increase your power directly." Rex looked at Connie with a serious expression, and said, "If you want to kill Gary before your brother is executed, then you have to follow my training strictly." Connie also kept the smile on his face after hearing that, and nodded seriously. "Why didn't you leave with them just now?" Elizabeth leaned against the headboard, and asked Yabamiya, who was looking at the golden jade token excitedly. "Because I can't bear to leave everyone and you, sister." Yabamiya put down the jade token, and leaned her head on Elizabeth's shoulder gently. She smiled, and said, "If I go to Golden Dragon Island, then I won't be able to lean on sister's shoulder like now." Elizabeth's gaze softened, and she reached out to stroke Yabamiya's head gently. She softly said, "If you want to become a powerhouse, then you have to accept loneliness. That uncle gave me the cultivation technique just now, so I don't have to go to Golden Dragon Island to cultivate the Golden Dragon's technique. That way, I can also become more powerful, and chase away those baddies who want to hurt you." Yabamiya picked up the token with a determined gaze, but her expression quickly crumbled, and she helplessly said, "But, how do I use this token? Why don't I see any cultivation technique?" "Drip your blood essence on the token, and undo the bloodline seal on the token. Then, you can check it." An ice crystal needle appeared in Elizabeth's hand, and she pinched one of Yabamiya's slender fingers. A drop of golden blood emerged from the tip of her finger, and landed on the golden jade pendant. The golden jade token immediately lit up with a dazzling golden light, and golden words appeared on the token one by one. At the same time, the shadow of a golden dragon appeared, and flashed across the token. Chapter 1252. Hot Pot's name spread throughout Chaos City's circle of friends overnight. Among the various circles of friends, the most discussed topic today was undoubtedly the somewhat mysterious and impactful Hot Pot. "Let's have Hot Pot tonight. Let's go." This became a common conversation among many foodies when they asked for a meal. The subversive way of letting customers participate in the cooking was novel, and the standardized cooking time allowed customers to cook delicious food. This aroused many people's curiosity. However, the per capita expenditure of 1,000 plus limited many people's actions. Therefore, eating hot pot had become a luxurious thing. However, for foodies, DIY was also where the fun lay when they were cash-strapped. "Hey, Shanshan, tell me how long it took to heat the various ingredients in the hot pot that you had last night. I'll try it when I get back tonight." A lady with long flaxen hair came forward and asked her colleague who was doing the accounting. "Reina, just give up. I think the main point of hot pot is not the ingredients, but the rich and flavorful bottom of the pot. However, I don't know what other spices and condiments there are other than chili, so I can't tell you how to cook it." That lady called Shanshan looked up at Reina and handed her the accounting book. "It's the end of the month. You'd better finish the review before you get off work today. Otherwise, the boss won't let you off." He threw all that heavy work to the two of us and scolded us all the time. Our monthly salary isn't even enough for us to eat a few good meals. I've had enough of such a boss. Rena's delicate face was filled with fatigue. Indeed. It would be great if I could become a waitress at Mamie restaurant. I'd be able to eat Boss Mag's delicious food every day. Even if I'm a little busy at work, Boss Mag has such a good personality, and he's also so handsome. I'm sure I'd be very happy working there. Shan Shan was also full of anticipation. That's great. Reina's eyes lit up. Don't even think about it. The number of women who want to be Amy's service staff is enough to circle Chaos City 3 times. The women who want to be Mr. Mac are all beautiful and capable. As for us. Shan Shan looked at the swimming ring on her stomach, and then at Reina. Reina's looks were rather delicate and pretty, and her figure was thin. However, she was dressed very casually and old-fashioned. Her slightly curly flaxen hair was casually tied up with a hemp rope, and she wore an old linen dress. If she were to stand next to the waitresses at Mamie's, she would definitely not match. That's true. That restaurant is so high class. They definitely wouldn't want someone like me. Reina nodded dejectedly, but her eyes soon lit up again. Although I can't become an employee, I can still go and watch them eat hot pot today. Maybe I can learn it quickly. I really hope you can succeed. In that case, I can go to your house often to have hot pot. Shan Shan nodded with a smile. Her colleagues' professional standards were average, but she had a unique ability when it came to food. As long as she had seen someone cook food before, she could quickly make it taste 80 to 90% similar when she got home. However, that was the food from normal restaurants and roadside stalls. She didn't really believe that Reina could perfectly replicate Mr. Mac's food. Mr. Mac's food was one of a kind. I'd better finish my work first. Otherwise, that demoness will definitely come and find trouble with me again. Reina returned to her seat with the account book. During the lunch break, Gina received a flying fish reply from Lantist. The High Priest of Lantist would personally lead 400 Lantistian merfolk warriors to reinforce them. Among them were 10 10th tier powerhouses, 49th tier powerhouses, and the rest were 7th tier and 8th tier powerhouses. It was a rather luxurious and sincere reinforcement lineup. Meg lit up the secret letter, and said to Gina, "Tell them that Mia and Elizabeth will set off to pick them up tonight. After that, they will head north together to reinforce the Night Elves." "All right." Gina nodded. She wrote another secret letter and stuffed it into the flying fish's stomach before releasing it. "Boss, although I really want to go with you, my master said that if I go, I might end up on the other side. Do you think I should go?" Connie yawned as she lay on the counter. Her eyes were a little dark, and she looked like she didn't have enough sleep. "I think you shouldn't." Meg looked at Connie. He felt that her master was quite good at judging people. "All right." Connie shrugged. She knew her place, too. It would be awkward if she got lost on the battlefield. Meow. Ugly Duckling walked over, and lay down on her hand. It slept comfortably on her hand. "Ugly Duckling, you only know how to sleep after eating. Be careful not to become a pig," Connie said with disdain. She yawned, and couldn't help but fall asleep on the counter. "Oh, yes. I have to write a recruitment advertisement." Meg suddenly remembered something important. The hot pot trial last night had fully exposed the restaurant's lack of manpower. Mia and the rest had to serve the customers in the normal area and the customers in the designated hot pot area. They ran back and forth in the restaurant, and the error rate increased by a few times. Moreover, they seemed to be in a hurry. This was not in line with the business philosophy that Meg had set for the restaurant. Hurried service staff would reduce the customer's dining experience, and make them anxious to enjoy the delicacies. This was a problem that had to be solved as soon as possible. Meg took the small blackboard, and after thinking for a while, he started writing on it, and hung it outside the door. In the evening, Mia and the rest came to work. They looked at Meg with strange expressions when they entered the door. "Boss, we saw your recruitment advertisement. Are you sure your requirements are really like that? Are the requirements too lax?" Meg was a little puzzled. "No, I just feel that it's a little too detailed, like that." Mia shook her head, and deliberated over her words. "Looks aside, why do service staff have to care about the size of other people's breasts? Furthermore, buttocks have nothing to do with serving dishes, right? Or do you want to hire more than just service staff?" Barbara crossed her arms in front of her chest, and rested her chin on the other hand as she looked at Meg with a scrutinizing expression. Everyone looked at Meg. Meg coughed softly, and said, Actually, it's not what you think. The chest and waist measurements are just a rough range to filter out some people who don't meet the standards. Otherwise, the line for the interview would stretch all the way to the city gate. When I choose service staff, the most important thing is ability and reflexes." "Oh," Connie yawned and stretched. She looked at everyone, and rubbed her sleepy eyes, and said, "You're all here. Is it time to eat?" Everyone looked at Connie, and then at Meg. They didn't say anything. Okay, this was an accident. Meg blushed with shame. Chapter 1253. Mr. Mack is looking for a young and pretty waitress with a full bust and hips, a slim waist, and who can work in the kitchen and in the hall. This requirement really fits the needs of Mamie's. Exactly. Look at all the waitresses at Mamie's. Which one of them doesn't fit this requirement? Mr. Mack is really choosing waitresses based on his standards of choosing his wife. I used to fit the requirements, but ever since I met Mamie's, this cute swimming ring is really making me feel autistic. Is it too late to change my gender now? I think Mr. Mack is seriously discriminating against us men. If we want to be flirtatious, what can women do? Have you forgotten that young man with a bow on his waist who was performing in the square 2 days ago? Mamie's recruitment notice quickly caused a huge commotion among the customers in the queue, and became the hottest topic of the day. The detailed requirements had already filtered out most of the people, and those who didn't fit the requirements could only watch the show. Meanwhile, some of the ladies who fit the requirements were already planning to fire their boss and join Mamie's, so that they could reach the pinnacle of their lives. The happiest employee in Chaos City definitely belonged to Mamie's. She could sit at the same table as Mr. Mack and Little Boss every day, and eat the delicious food cooked by him for free. Just thinking about it made her happy. Wow, Mamie's is hiring. Vanessa went up to the notice, and read it carefully. She was pleasantly surprised. I seem to fit all the requirements. Does that mean I can also work at Mamie's? Young mistress, that's not very good. Laura said anxiously. If His Majesty heard that Miss was working at a restaurant as a waitress, she would be dead meat. No. If you dare to sign up, I'll send you home tomorrow. Abraham shook his head. His tone was firm. What a joke. Letting Vanessa work in Chaos City was already very stressful for him. If she really went to work as a waitress, he wouldn't be able to answer to the king. Vanessa pouted. She looked at the recruitment notice reluctantly, but could only choose to give up for now. Looking for a new waitress. Rena, who had rushed over to Mamie restaurant right after work with the intention of secretly learning how to make the hot pot, had her eyes lit up. She went over to take a look, and the more she read, the more surprised she became. She could almost match all the conditions on it. Although she was thin and weak, she often went jogging and hiking to exercise. Under the pressure of the demon, she worked overtime for a month, and still didn't collapse. A basic salary of 3,500 yuan a month. The restaurant provided food and lodging, as well as a single day off. This was much easier than her current finance job. Of course, the most important thing was her room and board. Mamie Restaurant was the #1 restaurant in Chaos City now. Although she really couldn't afford to spend hundreds of dollars on a meal because of her mother's illness, and she had never eaten at Mamie Restaurant before, she had already heard about all kinds of delicacies from many people. If she became a service staff member of Mamie Restaurant, she would be able to eat all kinds of delicious food for free. This job was simply too attractive. If she was just a waitress in a restaurant, she would definitely have no problem taking orders and serving plates for the customers every day. Fuck. Then, Rena's gaze landed on her chest, and she lowered her head to look at her bare chest. She couldn't help but sigh. What's wrong with being flat-chested? Did flat-chested eat your rice? Was flat-chested not even qualified to be a waitress? This was truly sorrowful and distressing. Miss, go back and eat more melons. It's not too late to grow, a succubus with a proud upper body said with a smile as she glanced at Rena. Rena looked at the succubus's breasts, which were about to pop out, and shut herself up. She was already 19 years old. Even if she wanted to grow, it would take more than a day or two to grow. Interview time, the day after tomorrow afternoon, after closing hours at Mamie's. Rena remembered the time, and turned around to leave from the announcement. She had to think of a plan before the day after tomorrow. However, she didn't leave directly. She just stood a little further away. She came today to see how they ate hot pot. Even if she couldn't become an employee of Mamie's, it was still very good to be able to eat hot pot in her own home. After everyone in the restaurant had dinner, Meg opened the door for business. The customer's reaction to the restaurant's recruitment was as enthusiastic as Meg had expected. He smiled and rejected a few rough men who strongly recommended themselves and started the busy evening business. After a day of fermenting the name of the hot pot, many customers came in groups to eat the hot pot. Basically, they sat at one table at a time. So many people are eating hot pot. Reina looked at the tables full of customers. There were even more customers who could only wait in line, but not many people showed any signs of impatience. After a while, the hot pot ordered by a customer was served. The bottom of the golden red pot of red soup, mixed with a rich spicy aroma, spiraled into the air and then spread out. To be able to turn the whole pot of soup red, how much chili did the boss put in it? But in addition to the spiciness, the aroma is also very rich. It's not covered by the spiciness at all. Instead, it feels like it's stimulated. Reina looked at the pot of red soup that had just been served at the table closest to her. She closed her eyes and seriously felt the aroma. She had a magical nose, or a strange ability to distinguish smells. She could separate the mixed smells and distinguish the various fragrances. The aroma of meat was the first to bear the brunt, and only big bones that had been simmered continuously for more than 10 hours could produce such a rich aroma. She could also distinguish 7 or 8 spices and seasonings from the aroma, but there were a few fragrances that she couldn't distinguish. It was not that she couldn't distinguish them, but she had never seen this kind of spices, so she couldn't name them. They should not be common spices in the market. The golden red thick oil floating on the red soup should be butter. Butter and lard had a somewhat different aroma and color. She often went to the market to buy some animal fat that the butchers didn't want at a low price, so she was not unfamiliar with butter. Spices are too expensive. Even if I want to make a simple version, I can't do it at all. Reina sighed. What she lacked most was money, but the price of some spices was no different from gold. It was not something she could afford. Your Mandarin duck hot pot, please enjoy. Just then, Elizabeth placed a double-flavored pot on the other table and lit the fire for them. This is bone-thick soup. Reina, who had originally planned to give up, had her eyes lit up. The soup pot that was split in the middle was half spicy red soup, while the other half was thick white soup. A few scallions and mushrooms floated in it, looking very refreshing. Chapter 1254. Omitting the aroma of the spicy soup pot and only taking in the aroma of the clear soup pot, the aroma of the bones was still strong, but it was particularly refreshing and neat. There were almost no extra spices added, only green onions and mushrooms to enhance the freshness. But even so, it was a pot of fragrant bone soup that people couldn't help but want to have a bowl of it. This is so simple, and if I go to the morning market early in the morning, I can buy super cheap pig bones, which are suitable for making soup. But if I only use meat soup to cook vegetables, won't the taste be too light? Reina's face showed a thoughtful expression. Then she saw the girl who ordered the clear soup pot get up and go to the seasoning area to make a dipping sauce. After cooking the vegetables in the boiling clear soup pot, she took them out and dipped them in the seasoning dipping sauce, and then put them into her mouth. Gulp. Reina's Adam's apple bobbed. She understood that although the clear soup had a much lighter taste, the dipping sauce could solve this problem perfectly. Furthermore, according to one's taste, one could also taste something that suited one's taste through the dipping sauce. This boss is really a genius. He can think of such a way to eat. I can try this clear soup hot pot tomorrow. Reina said to herself happily. Although she wanted to try the red soup hot pot with her taste, her mother could also eat the clear soup hot pot, and she could mix the taste she liked through the dipping sauce. Oh, this hot pot looks so fragrant, but the price is too expensive. I heard that it costs hundreds of copper coins to eat it once. Yes, the dishes cooked by the boss of this restaurant are delicious, but the price is too high. We can't afford it, so we can only smell the smell here. If it costs dozens of copper coins, we can take the children to have a meal here. But hundreds of copper coins, who can afford it with the old and young at home? When Reina was about to leave, she overheard the conversation of a few middle-aged men beside her. She felt a little upset. If she could have a meal with a few dozen copper coins, she would also want to bring her mother to such a beautiful restaurant. However, since so many people want to eat hot pot but can't afford it, and almost no one wants pork bones, duck intestines, and tripe in the market, wouldn't it be a good business opportunity if there was a restaurant that could provide cheap hot pot? An idea suddenly popped up in Reina's mind. She looked at the many people who were watching other people's hot pot with great interest. These people were all potential customers. Moreover, she was confident that she could perfectly replicate the clear soup hot pot. Although the red soup hot pot was a little difficult, after removing a few spices, it shouldn't be a problem for her to make a red soup that tasted pretty good. With the average consumption of less than 100 yuan, this price was already lower than the price of Mamie's single-pot base. As an accountant, she quickly ascertained the huge profits and market in this. Reina's heart was set ablaze, but she quickly extinguished it with a bucket of cold water. This is Mr. Mac's invention. It's too much to copy it directly. It's like stealing. I'd better come back for the interview the day after tomorrow. Reina glanced at the people who were still watching with great interest, and turned to leave. She had to rush home to cook for her mother. At night, after the opening hours, everyone cleaned up the restaurant. Elizabeth and Yabamiya were also preparing to set off for the boundless sea realm. After receiving the people from Lantisht, you guys head north directly. We'll meet at the 9th peak north of Vic Mountain. Elizabeth nodded. Gina, you have to communicate well with the warriors of Lantisht, and remember to wear your uniform. Don't cause any trouble along the way, Meg said to Gina, who was hugging the crystal bowl. As the translator, Gina also had to go to Lantisht with Mia and the rest. At the same time, she had to bring the uniform for the Lantisht warriors for this operation. Hmm. Gina nodded obediently. Boss, if we're all leaving, how are you going to the north? Mia asked curiously. I've already contacted a flying steed. It will bring us north tomorrow. You don't have to worry about us, Meg said with a smile. Oh. Mia nodded. The three of them bade farewell to everyone, and then climbed onto Elizabeth, who had reverted to her original form. Soon, they became a small black dot in the sky. Barbara, you should go back and rest too, Meg said to Barbara, who was still standing at the door. I want to try to contact the Moon Nation again. Maybe they've already repaired the teleportation portal. In that case, you can get a powerful reinforcement from the Moon Nation, Barbara said as she walked into the restaurant. That might not be a good thing. Meg raised his eyebrows. The Norland continent was already in a mess. If the Moon Nation opened up a passageway between the Norland continent and the Norland continent, would it develop into a surface defense war with the Norland continent? That was something that no one could predict. Don't you want me to go home? Barbara turned to look at Meg. Big sister Barbara, father said that you still need a few years to grow up. You don't have to worry, Amy reminded her. Who said that? I'm already grown up now. Barbara puffed out her chest. She didn't have much confidence. 15 years old. Underage. Meg pursed his lips. She was indeed still a little kid. Furthermore, Barbara was only 1.4 meters tall. She looked like a primary school student who went through puberty early. Sooner or later, you'll know how popular I am in the Moon Nation, Barbara thought to herself. Barbara was feeling a little embarrassed. She walked around Mamie Restaurant, and then stood in the center. She took off the necklace around her neck, and held it in her hand. After that, she closed her eyes, and began to chant an obscure incantation. Golden red light shone from the heart-shaped pendant on her necklace. With Barbara at the center, the image of an altar glowing with golden light slowly appeared beneath her feet, just like when Barbara had first appeared. It's here. Barbara opened her eyes, and looked at the altar with excitement. Right at this moment, the golden light flashed wildly a few times, and disappeared in an instant. The projection of the altar also disappeared without a trace. I failed again. Barbara hung her head with disappointment in her eyes. She had tried many times after coming to the restaurant, but she still couldn't establish a connection with the teleportation portal in the Moon Nation, let alone reactivate it. Was she never going to be able to return to the Moon Nation? It's all right, big sister Barbara. You still have us, two little hands said softly as they held on to Barbara's hands. Chapter 1255. In the royal palace of the Moon Nation, the king looked at his queen, who was tossing and turning restlessly in her bed, and comforted her, "Don't worry. Barbara is a smart child, and she's also an 8th-tier spatial magic caster. No one will be able to hurt her. Your Majesty, the child has never left the palace, and she doesn't know how sinister people are. She disappeared for a few months, and there's no news of her at all. She didn't contact us either. If anything happens to her, how am I going to live?" The queen sobbed, and her eyes turned red again. The king's expression was also a little heavy, but he still said gently, "Don't worry. The Grand Tutor and the rest are already speeding up the repair of the teleportation portal, and they recently found a sealed spatial stone vein. I've already ordered them to speed up the mining. Once the repair of the teleportation portal is completed, I'll personally lead the army to bring our child back. Quick report to His Majesty. There's a sudden anomaly in the teleportation portal. It might be Her Highness trying to contact us." A minister rushed into the palace in the middle of the night and shouted to the guards guarding the door. "Yes." The guard hurriedly replied. The disappearance of Princess Barbara had now become the most important matter in the Moon Nation. Urgent reports were sent out one by one, and the princess was still not found even after the entire Moon Nation was searched. A eunuch knocked on the door and said respectfully, "Your Majesty, the Grand Tutor reported that there's an anomaly in the teleportation portal. It might be Her Highness trying to contact us." What? The king and queen sat up from the bed almost at the same time. The king didn't even bother to change his clothes. He asked a palace maid to put on a cloak, and quickly walked out of the door. He said to the eunuch, "Ask the Grand Tutor to come and see me quickly." North of the goblins, a team of thousands of elves quietly arrived near the underground cavern and joined the elven army that was besieging the place. Pass down the order. The army is to rest here and prepare for the general attack on the underground cavern tomorrow. In the tent, Helena ordered coldly to an adjutant. Yes. The adjutant accepted the order and left quickly. Only Helena and Sally were left in the brightly lit tent. High Priestess, when we attack the underground cavern tomorrow, what will happen if Princess Irina and the Night Elves don't surrender? Sally hesitated for a while before asking Helena. Since we're defending to the death, the only outcome is naturally death, Helena replied calmly. Sally clenched her fists subconsciously. I know you pity them. Helena turned around and looked at Sally. But if you want to be the new elven princess, or even the ruler of the Wind Forest, you have to learn to put away your pity. As a ruler, you need to be strong and ruthless. If you can't make your people fear you, then you can't make them listen to you. But they are still our compatriots. Sally frowned. From the moment they chose to betray us, they were no longer our comrades, but the enemies of the Wind Forest. Helena chuckled disdainfully. All those who try to shake our rule are our enemies, and death is the best way for our enemies to leave. If Her Majesty comes out of seclusion and knows about this, the cold expression appeared on Helena's face as she said, seeing as Her Majesty agreed to implement my policy back then to make the elven race a powerful race that no other race can look down on, then she won't say anything about our decision just because of her personal feelings. The interests of the elves are above everything else, and Her Majesty thinks so too. Gina pursed her lips, and she suddenly felt a little sad. Back then, Her Majesty the Queen had silently allowed Helena to do all kinds of things to the princess's child, which seemed to have verified Helena's words just now. But was this really the right choice? The so-called interests of the elves were the interests of a few big races. For the ordinary elves, they had lost their freedom and were burdened with layers of exploitation, but they had never really gained any benefits. You're a smart child. I think you'll understand my painstaking efforts for the elves. Helena looked at the crystal ball floating in front of her. There was also a vast starry sky in it. Countless stars were shining, and one or two would turn into shooting stars from time to time. Among them, there was a dazzling star that was covered in a layer of darkness, and it was flickering unsteadily. Sally looked down and didn't say anything else. She clenched her fists, and her fingernails had already sunk deep into her flesh. She was powerless to change anything now. She could only continue to endure until the day she could lead the elves. Then, she would plan how to change everything. That was the agreement between him and Blower. They had chosen two different paths, but they would meet again here. When they met again tomorrow, they would be standing on completely different sides. Perhaps they would have to watch him and those respectable elves die. Two figures stood on the peak of the mountain, one in front and one behind. Why aren't you leaving? Irina turned around and looked at Shirley, who was standing behind her. Even though her exquisite face was full of fatigue after going through so many tough battles, she was still a rare beauty among the elves. Shirley looked at Irina with a smile, and said, "Even if I leave, it'll be very difficult for me to blend in with the ordinary elves. Why don't I follow your highness and fight in this final battle that's destined to be recorded in the history of the continent? It's quite good. This was the only elf in the wind forest that he admitted was more beautiful than him. Even though she still didn't know that he was the little boy who chased after them back then, it didn't seem so scary if he could follow her and fight for the freedom of the elves again, even if he had to die. That's right. Beautiful people like us are helpless sometimes. Irina nodded her head as if she had experienced it deeply. A smile appeared on Shirley's face. The princess was still so interesting. It was a pity that her heart already belonged to that powerful man. But why is this the final battle? Irina looked down at the alliance below with a smile, and said, "This will be the first battle of our resistance for freedom. The goal is not to die heroically, but to let all our people see our courage and the hope of resistance. Let the fire of freedom spread throughout the wind forest. When the autumn wind blows, it will turn into a prairie fire and set the entire forest ablaze. Remember, this is the main point. It has to be tested." "I'll remember." Shirley's eyes lit up. She seemed to have found a career that she could devote her life to. Irina turned to look at Shirley and solemnly said, "So, you can't die tomorrow. If I can't leave, you have to leave with Phyrus and return to Chaos City. Z, you have to go to the north by yourself tomorrow. Do you remember this location?" On a mountain peak in the northwest of Chaos City, Meg was holding a map and teaching Z the location. Chapter 1256. The next morning, Meg got up at the crack of dawn. He knocked on the door of the magic potion shop next door, gave the key to the restaurant to Cece, and asked her to take care of Amy and Anna for a day. "Don't worry, Mr. Mac. Although my cooking isn't as good as yours, I won't starve the two little ones," Cece said with a smile. "Thank you," Meg thanked her and turned to leave. This battle was unpredictable. Meg didn't want Amy and Anna to take such risks. He also needed to be more focused on this war. Any mishap could cause them to fall into a state of eternal damnation. He's going out, leaving the two children at home. I wonder what he's going to do. Cece looked at Meg's back and shook her head in confusion. She walked toward the restaurant. Her task today was to play with the two children. She had already told the boss yesterday. Speaking of which, the boss said that he was going out today, but he didn't say where he was going. These people were really mysterious. "Boss, I've trained this bald eagle for many years. You must ensure its safety and bring it back for me." Outside the city, an animal trainer handed a whip to Meg and said seriously, "Don't worry. We'll be back after visiting relatives in the south. If we're fast, we'll return the bald eagle to you tonight. Besides, the deposit I paid is enough for you to buy 2 more bald eagles. What are you worried about?" Meg, who had put on a big beard and darkened his skin by a few degrees, now looked like a 40-year-old uncle. Barbara, who was beside him, was wearing a gauze hat that covered her whole head. She looked like a child, and her face couldn't be seen. "Okay." The animal trainer nodded. What he said was right. This person gave the deposit very straightforwardly. Meg reached out to pat the bald eagle's head before jumping onto its back. Barbara also leaped onto the eagle's back. The bald eagle flapped its wings and flew up into the sky, quickly disappearing into the southern horizon. This bald eagle's wingspan was about 7 meters. It was just enough for 2 people to sit on its back, but it was a little crowded. Barbara, who was sitting in front, was almost hugged by Meg. "Aren't we going to the north? Why are we going south?" Barbara blushed, and tried to make her voice as cold as possible. "We have to erase all traces of our participation in this war as much as possible, so we're going south for a few kilometers before turning around and going north around Chaos City," Meg explained. He tightened the reins, and let the bald eagle continue to climb up. How troublesome. Bobla pursed her lips. She didn't think that was necessary. She moved uncomfortably, but she realized that Mag had already wrapped his arms around her, and she couldn't move at all. She blushed even more when she felt Mag's warm breath right next to her ear. Meg didn't want to take advantage of the little girl, but this bald eagle was considered the animal trainer's personal mount. There was only one seat in the front and back, and he usually brought his wife and children out to play, so the design of the seat was very family-like. Sitting in the back, he could only stretch his hands forward and grab the reins hanging around the bald eagle's neck. This way, he could just wrap his arms around the front seat. After all, the bald eagle was only a first-tier magic beast. Its intelligence was basically zero. It couldn't be like Oz, who could just give it directions and it could find it on its own. If you didn't care about it, it could turn around and throw you from a few hundred meters high. Or if it saw a female bird halfway, it could cause you to deviate from the flight path to the Pacific Ocean. In addition to its lack of intelligence, the bald eagle's lack of wind protection was also a big feature. It was the 12th lunar month of the winter, the coldest time of the year. It was white everywhere. The snow that fell a while ago hadn't melted yet. Sitting on the eagle's back, flying at a speed of more than 100 kilometers per hour at an altitude of 500 meters and facing the cold wind head-on, was not a comfortable experience. Barbara, who was still a little restless, soon lost consciousness from the cold. Her hair was already covered with white frost. "I say, you let me sit in the front just to block the wind, right?" Barbara suddenly realized something. She turned around and looked at Meg bitterly. "I want to, but you have to be able to block it." Meg looked down at Barbara, who only reached his chin, and said helplessly. Barbara, who was despised for her height again, blushed and said seriously, I will grow again." Physiologically speaking, the growth rate of a girl's height will slow down or even stop after the age of 15, but the chest will continue to develop. Meg said calmly. He glanced at Barbara's chest that was completely out of proportion to her height. If it grew again, it would be a bit exaggerated. Bastard. Feeling Meg's gaze, Barbara blushed. If they weren't in the air, she would have jumped up and kicked him. Pop, without waiting for Barbara to say anything, Meg put a helmet on Barbara's head. Then he pulled out a windproof thermal blanket from somewhere and wrapped it around Barbara's body. He wrapped his hands around her body, grabbed the reins, and began to turn the bird's head to the north. Barbara was stunned. The cold wind was instantly blocked, and a warm feeling surrounded her body. The helmet was surrounded by warm and comfortable fluff, but the front was transparent glass, so they could clearly see the outside. The soft and warm blanket blocked the cold wind and brought warmth. As for the back, the hard chest was as hot as fire, even hotter than the blanket. "Let's rest for a while. We may be facing a fierce battle today," Meg whispered in Barbara's ear as he put on his helmet. "Safety first." And far behind the bald eagle, a purple-striped griffin followed slowly in the sky. The morning sun shone on the mountain peak, illuminating the dark caves. In the abandoned mine, there were still traces of mining left behind. The continuous battles in the past half a month had also left new traces on the stone walls. At this time, teams of elven soldiers wearing the same armor had already assembled. They lined up neatly at the foot of the mountain, ready to launch the final attack into the underground cave. "Lord Borg, the guards have assembled. Should we launch the final attack?" a young general asked respectfully as he rode up to Borg, who was standing on the high platform. "Let the army wait." The high priest came from afar and brought the most elite warriors. "We can't take the credit for suppressing the bandits." Borg shook his head. He looked at the thousands of elves who had also assembled in the distance and sneered. "High priest, the army has assembled. Should we launch the attack? An adjutant asked Helena respectfully. Helena glanced at Borg, and a trace of disgust flashed across her eyes. She retracted her gaze and looked at the underground cave with countless mines. She waved her hand and said, "Attack. Destroy the rebels. Kill all those who resist." Chapter 1257. Fireballs and huge icicles crashed into the dark caves. The water mages condensed the water elements between heaven and earth and turned them into torrents that poured into the caves, as if they wanted to fill up the caves. Countless magic spells bombarded the mountain peak, and the huge mountain peak began to shake. Rocks flew everywhere, as if it could collapse at any time. In an empty cave in the underground cavern, although rocks were falling from above at any time, the hundreds of elves present didn't show any signs of fear or retreat. Irina stood in the middle of the crowd and glanced at the old faces. These were all veterans who had guarded the Wind Forest in the past. She raised her voice and said, "Today's battle may be the last battle for the base in the underground cavern. It may also be the last battle for many of our comrades. But more of our comrades have already infiltrated the enemy. They will bear the mission of spreading the flames of revolution among the enemy and let the flames of freedom burn the Wind Forest. Your Highness, please leave. Let us veterans stand as the last sentries. You take the remaining young people and leave the cave. You are the hope of the Wind Forest's future and the backbone of the revolution. You must not fall here," an old man said sincerely. "Yes, Your Highness, please leave and lead the young people to achieve the final victory of this war and establish the true elf kingdom." The other elves also tried to persuade her. The young people of the Wind Forest lack courage and courage. Today, I will teach them what resistance is, and what courage and freedom are. Irina shook her head and said seriously, "In this battle, I will stand with you all until the last moment." The eyes of the elves seemed to be burning with flames. Even though most of them were old men who were 700 or 800 years old, their chests were still surging with hot blood. It was as if they saw Her Highness the Queen who had led the elves to fight against the invaders. The flood that poured into the underground cavern was blocked by the blue light curtain, then turned into water vapor and rose up again. The icicles and fireballs sank into the mine. Most of the mine had already been sealed by stones, so they didn't cause any harm to the night elves who were concentrated in the underground cavern. The war has begun. It's time for us to enter the stage. Irina turned and walked toward the exit of the cave. She waved her hand gently, and the flood that poured into the underground cavern from all the passages instantly flowed backward. At the same time, she disappeared from the cave. Bang, bang, bang. The flood that poured into the underground cavern turned into pillars of water and flew out from all the caves in the underground cavern, turning into white ribbons and drenching the elves around the mountain peak. Irina appeared on the peak of the mountain peak and looked down at the elven army below. "It's Princess Irina." Gazing at Irina, who was standing alone on the mountain peak, the elf who was casting the spell instinctively stopped her movements. In the past 10-odd years, Princess Irina had been seen as the pride of the Wind Forest and the next elven queen. However, they're to fight elves to elves, elves to the elves, and the elves to ants, SSSS to the S to the elves. The S to the S ants to the S Earth S. She was the princess, but she raised the flag of resistance for the elves at the bottom. Yet, they stood opposite her and helped her. This made them feel ashamed, but they were powerless to resist. The elves' high spirits that had just been stirred up were quickly dampened, and it quickly spread. Many elves even lowered their heads and didn't dare to look at Princess Irina. Sally looked up at the figure standing on top of the mountain peak. Her white dress was blown up by the mountain wind, and she looked like a goddess looking down like a queen. Even if she was forced into a desperate situation, she was still that proud princess. She was an existence that people could only look up to. almost all the elites of the Wind Forest have been mobilized in order to encircle the Night Elves. Helena, Borg, how scared are you of us? Irina looked at Helena and Borg and said with a mocking smile, are the cries of freedom enough to make you feel scared? Borg's face was ashen. He looked at those elven soldiers with their heads lowered, and he resisted the urge to lash out with his whip. Helena's expression was still cold. She looked at Irina and said, Irina, if you lead the Night Elves to surrender now, I can spare their lives. But you will be locked up until Her Majesty comes out of seclusion. She will deal with you personally. Surrender. This is not my style, nor is it the style of the Night Elves. Irina shook her head, and said with a smile, this will be a long war. The elves at the bottom will unite and overthrow your rule, and build a new free kingdom. And today, we are going to kick off the prelude to this war. Night Elves, fight for freedom. The figures of the Night Elves appeared at the cave entrance one by one. Their voices were deafening and resonated through the clouds. A faint light flashed in the eyes of the elven warriors. They looked at those elves who were shouting for freedom, and something seemed to stir in their hearts. Their hearts seemed to beat faster. The mid-level generals could not hide the fear on their faces. After besieging the underground cavern for a month, they had already felt the tenacity of those fellows. They were defending the underground cavern with 10 times the number of troops. If their troops were 10 times, or even 100 times more, they could not imagine what the Wind Forest would become. Helena's expression was a little gloomy. She had racked her brains for the elves to build this stable and strong system, and now these fellows were trying to overthrow it. They should all be tied to the stake and burned to death. The elves have never been as strong and stable as they are now. No other race will dare to invade the Wind Forest. And you traitors who are trying to overthrow the Wind Forest and create chaos and war will all be executed, and will forever be engraved on the pillar of shame of the elves. Helena raised the crystal ball in her hand. Starlight shone, and she shouted coldly, guards, exterminate these traitors. The 6,000 elven guards charged toward the underground cavern. The magic spells and arrows that had stopped previously were once again bombarded the mountain peak like raindrops. God of light, please grant me the power to let the holy light shine upon the world. Irina closed her eyes, opened her hands, and chanted softly. The magic caster's staff floated in front of her, and then spun wildly. Beams of light intertwined and shone through the golden ball at the top of the magic caster's staff. The moment the chant ended, the golden ball suddenly erupted with a golden light that was even more dazzling than the sun, and spread in all directions. My eyes! The elves who were charging forward and surrounding the mountain peak covered their eyes almost at the same time as if they had gone blind. It was pitch black, and they could not see anything. Their formation was instantly messed up. Helena, back then, you took advantage of me when I was at my weakest after giving birth to a child and snatched my newborn child. Let's settle this score today. Irina opened her eyes and held the magic caster's staff. She shouted coldly, took a step forward, and disappeared from the mountain peak. Chapter 1258. The holy light shone, and all the elves who were charging towards the mountain peak were blinded. At the same time, Irina took a step forward and disappeared from the mountain peak. A golden light flashed in front of Helena, and a magic caster's staff came crashing down on her head. Humph! Helena snorted coldly, and a starry sky appeared above her head, blocking the magic caster's staff. Boom! With a dull thud, the magic caster's staff smashed into the starry sky. The cloud-like starry sky trembled, and the starlight flickered, but it was still firm. Irina appeared, holding the magic caster's staff with both hands, and still maintaining the smashing posture. Not many people knew that the prodigy of the Wind Forest, the only light element great magic caster in the world, was also a powerful close combat magic caster. Unfortunately, Helena was one of them, so she wasn't caught off guard by Irina, who suddenly switched to close combat mode. Her calm expression made it seem as if she had expected it. The stalemate continued, but the starry sky that was originally suspended above her like a shield suddenly surged in all directions like a tide, and swept Irina into the starry sky in the blink of an eye. Starry Sky Domain. Helena's most powerful domain, and also the domain that could give her the greatest boost. In a battle between 10th-tier great magic casters, whoever could drag the other into their own domain would basically be in an invincible position. Helena's Starry Sky domain is indeed not that simple. Borg, who wasn't affected by the holy light earlier, looked at the area covered by the black starry sky. Even he couldn't see what was happening inside. However, that vast and deep starry sky domain and the powerful magic waves that couldn't be ignored made him a little wary. After Irina was destroyed, there would definitely be a battle between him and Helena. She was the one who allowed him to climb to his current position back then, but she didn't allow him to climb any higher. The great general of the Wind Forest was no longer enough to satisfy him. What he wanted was to become the king of the elves, and the ruler of the Norland continent. The power from the other world began to stir in his body again. The deal with the devil had just begun. Although he had encountered a little trouble before, they had now re-established the connection. It was just that this time, he had to pay a greater price. He had to sacrifice some of his people. He didn't have much time left. Not only did he have to deal with Irina, but he also had to deal with Helena as soon as possible. Only then would he be able to completely control the Wind Forest. A protruding black line that looked like an earthworm appeared between his eyebrows and disappeared in an instant. His red eyes also gradually returned to normal. The elves who had been blinded by the holy light began to recover gradually. What welcomed them was a torrent of magic spells and arrows that were extremely accurate. The defenseless elves were struck by this wave of attacks head-on, and several hundred of their elites fell in an instant. Their momentum was instantly thwarted, and many of the elves hurriedly retreated as their formation was thrown into disarray. On the other hand, the commanders of both sides were currently in the Starry Sky domain. No one knew what was happening inside. However, this was Helena's domain, after all. Furthermore, the High Priestess was known as the #1 person after the Queen. She had once led the elves to victory in the racial war with the Queen, and expelled all the invading demons from the Wind Forest. Now that she had trapped Irina in the Starry Sky domain, there was no doubt as to who would win. As long as Irina was defeated, the Night Elves would just be a pile of loose sand. They didn't even have a single 9th-tier magic caster. Their destruction would only be a matter of time. Your Highness. Sally, who was standing not far away from the Starry Sky domain, clenched her fists as she looked at the dark starry sky worriedly. A battle like this was no longer something she could participate in or influence. Being trapped in the other party's domain had already determined the outcome of this battle. Your Highness. Phyllis, who was standing at the entrance of a cave, exclaimed softly. She wanted to rush out instinctively, but Shirley grabbed her wrist. It's useless even if you go. You'll only be a burden to Her Highness. Shirley shook her head as she stared at the starry sky magic. Apart from being nervous, there was also a hint of anticipation. Her Highness was the most beautiful elf she had ever seen, and also the smartest one. She didn't believe that she would be so careless as to let herself fall into a hopeless situation. Just as the elves were waiting for Helena to capture Irina and announce the downfall of the Night Elves' rebellion, a blinding beam of golden light that was as sharp as a long sword forcefully split open a path in the dark starry sky. Irina, in her white robe, floated out of the gap that was split open. 100-meter-long beam of light shot out from the tip of her magic caster's staff like a sword, and swept across the group of elves. The armor and metal weapons on the elven soldiers melted instantly. In the blink of an eye, close to 1,000 elite elven soldiers were disarmed. The princess has broken the High Priestess' starry sky domain. The night elves were overjoyed, and their worried hearts were finally at ease. They didn't expect the princess to be so powerful that she wasn't even afraid of the starry sky domain. She actually broke it. Borg was also shocked. He could faintly feel that Irina had become stronger compared to the last time they fought. When his gaze landed on Irina's beam of light, his eyelids twitched, and he felt frustrated. He had an extreme feeling of disgust toward this holy light. He wanted to avoid it, but he also wanted to destroy it completely. It seems like light magic is a threat to me. Fortunately, there's only one light magic caster, and she has to die here today. Borg squinted his eyes slightly, and reached out to grab the long sword at his waist. If necessary, he didn't mind attacking Irina together with Helena as long as he could ensure her death. What a pity. If you could be more obedient, no one would be more suitable to protect the wind forest than you. Helena looked at Irina, who was sent flying, and a tinge of pity flashed across her eyes. However, it quickly turned into coldness. Since she couldn't control it, she could only destroy it completely. The starry sky domain expanded rapidly, and almost covered a radius of 1,000 meters. The sunlight disappeared, and what was left was only the dark night and the bright starry sky. At this moment, the magic caster's staff in Irina's hand was like the only torch in the dark night, still burning unyieldingly. Starfall. Helena looked at Irina, and calmly spat out 2 words. The twinkling stars in the sky suddenly shook violently, and then dozens of them began to fall with long red tails. They became bigger and bigger in the eyes of all the night elves, and crashed towards the mountain peak and Irina. Irina looked up at the huge meteorite that was more than 10 meters in diameter, and frowned slightly. She raised the magic caster's staff in her hand, and chanted, "God of light, please bestow upon me the power of destruction." Light of destruction. An arc of light shot towards the sky. The meteorite was swept by the arc of light, and exploded into countless pieces of gravel in the air, scattering down. Chapter 1259. I'll leave this battle to all of you. Remember, if you can make a move, don't talk. It's a one-wave attack. Beat them until they're scared, and leave after that. Safety first, confidentiality second. On the peak of a giant mountain, Meg looked at the 400 thugs in suits in front of him and shouted. The 400 Lantistian warriors wore the same black suits and the same black sunglasses. They stood there with cold expressions, and had the aura of a boss that made people respect them. Dump them. Everyone shouted in unison. Meg was very satisfied that the Lantistian warriors gave him face. He turned to the High Priest and said, "High Priest, our objective for this trip is to rescue the Night Elves and defeat the army from the Wind Forest. Our target is the middle and high-level combat power of the enemy. The battle will last for half an hour. If we can't expel them, we will escort the Night Elves south instead. Don't fight to the death with the Wind Forest. Don't worry, Mr. Meg. We will complete the mission." The High Priest nodded. Meg nodded. He turned to look at Yabamiya and Elizabeth, and said, "Be careful. Boss, don't worry and wait for us here. We will bring Shirley and Phyllis back safely," Yabamiya said with a smile. Yabamiya and Elizabeth transformed back into their dragon forms, and let the 400 Lantistian warriors get on their backs. They flapped their wings and flew north. "You really don't want to go and take a look?" Camilla egged Meg on. "I know you want me to die accidentally, and the contract will be automatically cancelled. Don't worry, I cherish my life very much." Meg smiled and shook his head. "Coward." Camilla pursed her lips. She didn't expect this fellow to see through her thoughts. "Let's set off too. I can't wait to see what the war in this world is like." Barbara looked at Camilla eagerly. She didn't know how to ride the bald eagle, so she could only let Camilla carry her. Alright, let's go then. Camilla held Barbara's waist with one hand, and a pair of black wings appeared behind her back. She also flew towards the north. Watching the two giant dragons and the bat turn into black dots and disappear into the horizon, Meg turned around and whistled. The purple-striped griffin pierced through the clouds and swooped down from the sky. It spread its wings and slowly stopped on the mountain peak. Oh whoa! Ozzy raised its head and let out a long howl. Wagging its tail, it happily extended its head and rubbed against Meg's hand. Gee. The previously arrogant bald eagle was so scared that it fell to the ground, squeaking twice, lying on the ground, not daring to move. Old friend, today is going to be a fierce battle, but we have to save her. Otherwise, we won't be men. Meg touched Ozzy's head, turned over, and jumped onto the griffin's back. He tore off his big cotton-padded jacket, revealing the black tights underneath. He put on a black cloak, a black and white mask, and the Tian-Du sword at his waist. He was Alex. Let's go. We have to get to the underground cavern before they do. The war may have already begun. Meg patted Ozzy's back gently. Oh whoa. Ozzy flapped its wings and suddenly flew into the sky. It plunged into the clouds, turned into a black shadow, and disappeared into the horizon in the blink of an eye. The battle between Helena and Irina was dark and extremely dangerous. Scorching hot meteorites fell all over the ground, leaving many craters of various sizes on the ground. There were a few holes in Irina's dress, and a few strands of Helena's hair had been chopped off, making her look rather disheveled. The crystal ball emitted a dim light, and stars were annihilated from time to time. The magic caster's staff was already stained with blood, but it still made Irina look holy and pure. On the other side, the elven guards who had resumed their attack were also engaged in an intense battle with the night elves. The night elves, who were far outnumbered and weaker individually, displayed an awe-inspiring tenacity. When their magic was exhausted and the last arrow in their quiver was shot, they began to lift stones and throw them at the elves at the foot of the mountain. The guards, who were far more powerful, armed, and outnumbered than the night elves, were still unable to take down the underground cavern after 3 or 4 consecutive charges. The elven guards looked at the elderly elves who were pierced by arrows and covered in blood, but were still throwing stones down without a care for their own safety. They felt some respect and fear in their hearts. What kind of power was supporting them and making them so fearless of death? Was it freedom? Compared to freedom, was death really not worth mentioning? These questions began to torture the hearts of these young people, causing their momentum to slow down a lot. Their willingness to be exploited in order to survive also began to waver. I once joined forces with the Queen to lead the elves to chase the invaders out of the forest and spent my life to build a powerful elf tribe. You should learn to respect and cherish it instead of trying to destroy it. Helena held up the crystal ball slowly and looked at the pale-faced Irina whose chest was rising and falling slightly. She pointed at a star that was shining brightly and dimly and said, "This is you. You used to be the brightest star in this starry sky, but now you're about to be annihilated. Irina, you disappoint me too much. This forest is the one that disappoints me. I used to think this was the most perfect place, but later I realized that this is actually the dirtiest place, even dirtier than the Demon Islands." Helena shook her head, and the elven guards who had already reached the top of the mountain dimmed slightly. This was a battle that was destined to be a crushing defeat. Everyone already knew that before it even started. Meanwhile, those old fellows had already displayed their awe-inspiring bravery and the strongest oath to freedom. The battle with Helena had consumed most of her magic power. With the support of the Starry Sky domain, Helena's strength had indeed exceeded her expectations. Number 1 below the Queen, this was not just a compliment. The Night Elves did not have any reinforcements. Fortunately, those young comrades had all retreated. They should have disguised themselves and infiltrated various families and territories to spread the seeds of freedom among the lower class. If there was a day when the wind blew, the seeds of fire would become a forest fire. Unfortunately, she might not have the chance to see it. I should have done more the last time. It's a pity that I only kissed her. Irina thought of Meg and Amy, but she did not want them to appear here at this moment. If she left, Amy could only be taken care of by Meg. Her food is so delicious, and Amy is so clingy to her. Even without me, there seems to be no problem. Irina thought to herself, and a smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Then, there was no problem. She raised the magic staff in her hand and looked at Helena with a hint of madness. You won't have the chance to self-destruct. Helena seemed to have seen through Irina's thoughts. She clenched her fist, and the starry sky in the magic ball collapsed instantly. The starry sky domain, which covered an area of thousands of square meters, also contracted instantly and squeezed towards Irina, who was standing in the center. Starry sky collapse, Helena's ultimate magic. Howl. Right at this moment, a long howl came from the sky. A purple figure descended from the sky like lightning and went straight for the collapsed starry sky. Chapter 1260. The realm of stars instantly collapsed toward the center as if it were being squeezed. The black starry sky became a frantically surging ink-black mist. Once it completely collapsed, everything in the center would disappear. Your Highness! The Dark Elves exclaimed. However, they were powerless at the sight of the collapsing realm of stars, so they could only look on helplessly. Right at this moment, a figure descended from the sky and flashed toward the collapsing realm of stars like a bolt of purple lightning. A long sword was unsheathed, and a streak of silver sword intent that was more than 10 meters long tore through space and sliced into the frantically shrinking realm of stars. Boom! The shrinking realm of stars was sliced open by the sword, and the process of collapsing was interrupted. Meanwhile, the purple-striped griffin still plunged into the chaotic mist like a bolt of lightning, and in the next instant, it flew out from the other end. A man wearing a black and white mask sat on the griffin's back with Irina in his arms and a silver sword in his hand. He was extremely arrogant. The battlefield suddenly fell silent. All of the elves looked at the purple-striped griffin, and they suddenly thought of some legends. A hint of reverence appeared in their eyes as they looked at the masked man holding Irina. Alex, a man whose name shook the entire continent. He was known as a dragon-slaying warrior. Several months ago, he had appeared in the Wind Forest and severely wounded Borg. Many of the elves still remembered that scene clearly. They had thought that this battle was already over, but they didn't expect him to appear. This made the situation a little uncertain. Your Highness. Phyllis, who was about to jump off the mountain, looked at Irina in his arms with reddened eyes. She finally heaved a sigh of relief. Alex finally came at the last moment. The princess's love for him was not in vain. Alex. Shirley also let go of Phyllis's hand. She looked at the back of the man sitting on the griffin and Irina in his arms, and a smile appeared on her face. As expected, he was the only one in this world who was worthy of the princess. Sally looked at Irina in the mysterious man's arms, and then her gaze fell on the masked man. Was he the man in the legends? A hero saving a damsel in distress. This scene was indeed very impactful, and it made her heart explode. But why does this figure look so familiar? Where have I seen him before? Sally's eyes narrowed slightly, revealing a trace of doubt. She had heard of Alex's name countless times, and had also imagined what the man who captured the princess's heart would look like, but she was sure that she had never seen him before. But why did he feel so familiar? However, if he could take the princess away, he he would at least have a chance to survive today's battle. The realm of stars was forcibly destroyed, and Helena took a step back. She looked at the purple-striped griffin with a cold expression, but there wasn't much surprise in her eyes. "Alex, you really came." A sinister smile appeared on Borg's face. He waved his hand, and several figures behind him flew off in different directions. "Why are you here?" Irina looked at Meg with a look of surprise on her face. That sword attack from before was definitely his peak. Could it be that he had recovered his strength? "Only 15 minutes, Meg said softly with a hint of helplessness. "You're really short." Irina pursed her lips, but there was a sweet smile at the corner of her mouth. She thought that she would never see him again, but he still came. "Seems like it's very necessary to correct my manhood." Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. This was a matter of a man's dignity. Besides, 15 minutes wasn't considered short, okay? "I'll take you guys away." Meg looked at Irina. Her face was a little pale, and there was some dust on her face. She looked a little disheveled, and it made his heart ache a little. "Us?" Irina looked in the direction of the mountain peak. The night elves had already retreated to the mountain peak. After a tough battle, there were less than 100 of them left, and almost all of them were injured. After stopping to rest, the elves began their final round of attack. "You can't take so many people away." Irina shook her head slightly. Z was indeed very big, but Helena and the others wouldn't just watch them take everyone away peacefully. "Trust me," Meg said gently. The purple-striped griffin turned around and flew towards the mountain peak. With a flap of its wings, the elves that were climbing the mountain peak were blown away like ants. Ding! Detected that an unstable factor poses a huge threat to the progress of the God of Cookery cultivation plan. New mission, host, please kill the target, Borg, within 24 hours. Mission reward, activate the round-the-world mission line and obtain a portable restaurant. Mission failure, physical strength -3. Just then, the system's voice suddenly sounded in Meg's mind. "Fuck." Meg raised his eyebrows. This was completely outside of his plan. His plan was to retreat without any injuries. The role of the 400 thugs in suits was to deter them, but the system suddenly gave him a mission to kill Borg. Although he detested Borg to the core, he was still a powerful 10th-tier powerhouse. Although the system gave him 24 hours, it was no different from 15 minutes to him. 2 minutes had already passed. The griffin flew around the mountain peak and blew away all of the attacking elves. Meg whispered into Irina's ear, "I want to kill Borg." "They probably want to kill you too." Irina's brows furrowed slightly as she looked at the calm Helena and Borg, who was galloping toward the mountain peak. "If you want to kill someone, you have to be prepared to be killed." Meg gently placed Irina down on the mountain peak. He then steered the purple-striped griffin toward Borg with a serious and focused expression. "Do it!" Helena shouted coldly. She raised the crystal ball above her head. Night fell again, and it was like a black curtain that slowly pulled toward Meg. At the same time, 4 elderly elves appeared behind Helena. They were all holding magic casters' staffs and chanting spells silently. Light flashed on their staffs, and terrifying magic waves gathered. There were also 4 elven magic casters following behind Borg. They were chanting spells, and flames appeared in the sky. Trees began to grow from the ground, and the branches extended toward the sky like vines. 10 10th-tier great magic casters. This encirclement against the night elves finally revealed its true fangs at this moment. The night elves and Irina were only one of the targets. Alex was the main character of this encirclement. On the mountain peak, Irina stabbed her magic caster's staff into the mountain rock and chanted softly. Bright sunlight pierced through the black curtain and landed on the golden crystal at the top of the magic caster's staff. Then, it turned into a beam of light and chased after the purple-striped griffin. What a big battle. It would be awkward if the boat fails. Meg held the Tian-Du sword with both hands, and his expression also became very serious. The 10th tier great magic casters of the elves were almost all out. This was indeed a little beyond his expectations. Chapter 1261. It was too late to retreat now. Meg had to at least hold on until the reinforcements arrived. Of course, if the reinforcements did not arrive in 12 minutes, he would have to fight with his life. The purple-striped griffin opened its mouth and shot out a ball of purple lightning. The flames in the sky were instantly blasted open, and a hole was created. It flew up and avoided the twigs that were coming from below. It increased its speed and avoided the spells that were coming from all directions. Then, it turned around and dove down. The Tian-Du sword glowed coldly as it rushed towards Borg. Darkness descended, and the starry sky domain enveloped Meg. The air seemed to have become muddy. Just then, a beam of holy light shone from the peak of the mountain and tore the darkness apart. It followed the purple-striped griffin like a protective talisman and opened a path for it. Go to hell, Alex. Borg's face was covered in a black death aura. He raised his black magic staff above his head, and a huge black tiger suddenly jumped out. It opened its black bone wings and pounced towards the purple-striped griffin. This aura. Meg's brows furrowed tightly as he looked at the massive tiger with a pair of flamboyant skeletal wings and a black aura revolving around its body. The rich aura of death emanating from its body clearly wasn't something that an elf who was close to nature should possess. This Borg could make the system issue a mission to kill him in the name of affecting the process of becoming the god of cookery. It seemed that he had obtained some unusual power. Borg, who was severely injured by him last time, was also very chaotic now. It was strong sometimes and weak sometimes. The changes were very sudden. This situation was also very strange, but one thing was for sure. He had become stronger than before. Magic transformation was a common method used by high-level magic casters. The black tiger's size was not inferior to the purple-striped griffin at all. It jumped up and pounced on the purple-striped griffin like a hungry tiger pouncing on a sheep. Its sharp claws with a black glow tried to tear Ozzy's wings while its bloody mouth bit towards its neck. Borg sneered, as if he could already see the scene of the purple-striped griffin and Alex being torn apart. Last time, he was severely injured by a griffin, and his reputation was ruined. The Grim Reaper healed his injuries and gave him even more power. Killing Alex and Irina would remove the biggest threat. This tiger of death came from the netherworld. It could tear apart all enemies and absorb their blood essence and strength for its own use. Today, he was going to return the humiliation he had suffered. After obtaining the power of Alex and Irina, he would become the most powerful person in the Wind Forest, and embark on his journey to conquer the Norland continent. Such a rich aura of death. What is Borg trying to do? Helena looked at the black tiger with unease and disgust in her eyes. The other elves were also shocked and fearful upon seeing this. Meg held the sword in front of him with both hands. Holy light fell on the sword, covering the silver-heavy sword with a layer of golden light. The elemental energy in his body circulated crazily and poured into his hands. The 10-meter-long sword chi rose and was dyed with golden holy light. It's useless. Go to hell. Borg roared with a sinister smile. The skeleton-winged tiger let loose an enraged roar as its eyes turned crimson. Its black skeletal wings were like a pair of sharp blades as it slashed toward Meg. Slash. Meg said in his heart, and slashed forward with his sword. The furious bone-winged tiger was still huge in front of the 10-meter-long sword chi. Its sharp bone wings gave off a terrifying glow, and the aura of death surrounded them. It was not afraid of Meg's sword chi at all. It did not dodge, and continued to attack Meg and the purple-striped griffin at the same time. Slash! The sword chi slashed the bone-winged tiger's body. The holy light enveloping the sword chi clashed with the aura of death, and the black aura of death instantly retreated like fire meeting water. This sword chi was very powerful and very fast. With the support of the holy light, the rich black aura of death retreated in a panic, and did not cause any obstruction to the sword chi. The sword chi landed on the bone-winged tiger's body. Roar! The bone-winged tiger let out a terrified roar, and tried to use its claws to stop the sword chi. But its speed was too slow in front of that sword chi. The purple-striped griffin suddenly charged forward and cleaved the tiger's head with its long sword, splitting it in half like a hot knife through butter. The 100-meter-long bone-winged tiger was instantly reduced to a rain of blood, which splattered onto the ground, corroding a series of ghastly craters into the rocks. Pfff, Borg threw up a mouthful of black blood, and he clutched his chest as he stared at Meg with incredulity. Impossible. All of the elves were stunned speechless upon seeing this. They were amazed by Alex's immense power, but they were also horrified by Borg's terrifying aura and uncomfortable dark magic. Even the great magic casters reflexively stopped casting their spells. This aura doesn't belong to this world, does it? Meg raised his sword chi toward Borg and said in a cold voice, "Then you deserve to die." No. Borg retreated in horror, and he raised his magic caster's staff in an attempt to cast another spell. Cold light flashed, and the sword chi had already sliced through the staff, as well as Borg's horrified face. Lord Borg is dead. Borg's elven guards were all shocked and they saw half of Borg's head being chopped off with a single slash. Lord Borg, who was unparalleled in the eyes of all the elves, was actually killed in an instant by 10 great magic casters. That man was too terrifying. It's good that he's dead. Helena's eyes flashed, but the corners of her mouth curled up quickly. This was also an uncontrollable chess piece. The Wind Forest only had the queen, and Borg wanted too many things. Then, she stared at Meg, and the stars in the crystal ball shifted. The starry sky domain surged again, and surged toward Meg. "Kill him," she said coldly. "Yes. Yes." The great magic casters behind her had yet to recover from the shock of Borg's death, and they hurriedly continued to chant their spells. On the mountain peak, the holy light disappeared instantly, and the pale-faced Irina staggered to hold on to her magic caster's staff. She looked at Meg's back, and a smug smile appeared on her face. "My man indeed." Ding! The target is confirmed dead. Congratulations on completing the mission. You've received the reward, a portable restaurant, and you've unlocked the mission line. Mission 1, the system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. However, Meg wasn't in the mood to listen to the system's blabbering. After confirming Borg's death, he immediately steered the purple-striped griffin into the sky. 3 meteors burning with red flames crashed at the position he was standing at previously. Debris flew everywhere, and 3 huge craters were left behind. Countless firebirds appeared in the sky, and the crazily growing giant trees started to shoot poisonous thorns. Countless meteors fell from the dark sky. The purple-striped griffin's speed started to decrease rapidly in the starry sky domain, and it could only barely dodge the chain of magic attacks. Without the guidance of the holy light, it couldn't even determine the direction. At the same time, the elven guards who had stopped to rest earlier also launched their final charge toward the mountain peak. After killing Borg, the situation fell into a quagmire. "System, if you don't do something, Daddy is going to die," Meg shouted in his heart. No matter how strong he wasn't a god. He was facing 9 10th tier magic casters, and he was trapped in their domains. He had nowhere to retreat, and he couldn't even touch his opponents. Bullying with numbers, how shameless. I agree. At this moment, two old voices suddenly sounded from the sky. Chapter 1262. A red dragon with a wingspan of more than 100 meters hovered above the starry sky domain. Crassus and Julian stood on the dragon's back and looked down with disdain and mockery on their faces. Crassus, Lord of Fire. Julian, Lord of Frost. Red Dragon. All the elves looked up, and a great magic caster quickly recognized the two old men standing on the red dragon's back and exclaimed. In the magic world, there had always been two peaks that represented the peak of ice magic and the limit of fire magic. They were the gods of ice and fire. The two of them had been fighting for their entire lives, but there was no clear winner. However, their powerful abilities were undeniable. Why did they suddenly appear here? Although the Red Dragon tribe was not considered powerful among the dragon tribes, there were still a few 10th-tier giant dragons. What was the meaning of this Red Dragon, Crassus, and Julian appearing here? The elven great magic casters who had almost forced Alex and Irina into a corner were all bewildered. Helena looked up at the two of them and the dragon with a hint of doubt in her eyes. She was afraid that there would be more trouble in today's siege. It's Amy's masters. Phyllis, who had climbed up to the peak and supported Irina, looked at the giant dragon and the two old men on its back, and exclaimed in surprise, "Could it be that boss and the others are here to save us?" Shirley, who was guarding at the side, was also surprised. She had also seen the power of the two great magic casters with her own eyes. With their help, at least Alex could escape from his current passive situation. Poor Bean Sprout, he was here a long time ago. Irina glanced at Phyllis. This poor little girl was still kept in the dark by Meg. However, she was also surprised and touched when she looked at Crassus and Julian. She did not expect them to appear here. Crassus, Julian. Meg, who was dodging the spells in the starry sky domain, was slightly stunned when he heard the voice outside. They were not the reinforcements he had invited. It was completely out of his expectations. Little Irina, don't panic. We're here to save you. Crassus turned around and smiled at Irina. Julian also turned around to look at Irina. Although she was in a sorry state, she didn't seem to have suffered any serious injuries. Julian's expression eased slightly, and he nodded slightly. He then looked down at Helena with an icy expression. "Old thing, help me beat up that damned old woman to vent my anger." Irina laughed and shouted loudly. "Crassus, Julian, and the Fire Dragon race, what are you doing here? This is an internal matter of the elf clan. I hope you won't interfere. Otherwise, you will be seen as going against the elf clan." Helena shouted coldly. It was fine if it was Crassus and Julian, but where did that insignificant 9th-tier fire dragon get the courage to interfere with the elf clan's matters? Is it that great to go against the elf clan? Crassus sneered and asked in return. "The last race that spoke to us like this was the man-eating demons," Julian said coldly. "In that case, it's not that great," Crassus said with a smile. I was captured by them to be their mount. It has nothing to do with me. I didn't want to come here." That fire dragon finally found a chance to interject. His voice was full of grievance. He was a mighty 9th-tier giant dragon, but he was knocked out with a stick and chained up for an entire night. Then, he was forced to fly north early in the morning. He didn't dare to resist in the face of two ruthless people who killed dragons without batting an eyelid. However, he didn't want the Red Dragon clan to offend the entire elf clan. He could only risk his life to show that he was innocent. Helena's expression was a little ugly. She ignored that red dragon and continued to shout coldly, the elf clan is not something that the man-eating demons can compare to. If you don't want to face the revenge of the Wind Forest, then leave this place immediately. Helena, you talk a lot of nonsense. It's like your foot-binding cloth. It's smelly and long. Is there anyone in the Wind Forest that can defeat us? Crassus pursed his lips. Then, he looked down at the red dragon under his feet and said, "Little Red, stay here obediently and wait for us to finish our fight. If you run away, then I'll go to Dragon Island and have a fight with your grandfather." "Yes." The red dragon replied sullenly. He was trembling and didn't dare to move. "Alex, Grandpa is here to save you again." Crassus took a step forward, and 2 spinning fireballs immediately appeared under his feet. They tore through the dark starry sky domain and smashed into the ground with a loud bang. A mage who was in the middle of casting a spell was sent flying, and the wind blades that were flying all over the sky instantly disappeared. He killed a supreme magic caster in an instant. A close combat magic caster is so scary. The elves were shocked. They looked at Crassus in a different light. At the same time, Julian, who was standing on the dragon's back, also made a move. The mountain where the underground cavern was located started to freeze rapidly from the middle. The elven guards who were still trying to break through the mountain peak were instantly frozen into white ice sculptures. The ice spread hundreds of meters around the mountain peak before it stopped. "Run!" The elves were shocked. They didn't dare to continue charging forward. They turned around and ran. "Grandpa!" Meg was speechless. Although Crassus was old enough to be his grandpa, wasn't this a little too much since they were acquaintances? However, Crassus had torn a gap in the starry sky domain, and another supreme magic caster had been killed. The pressure on him was greatly reduced. He slashed the tree branch that was wrapped around Ozzy's legs with his sword, and dodged a group of firebirds that were pouncing towards him. He then pounced towards the nearest supreme magic caster. "Kill them!" Helena yelled. The supreme magic casters retreated hurriedly. At the same time, they began to adjust their spells to target Crassus and Julian. Although there were only 3 of them, they posed a great threat to them. The firebirds in the sky changed direction and pounced towards Crassus. They formed a flame giant that was hundreds of meters tall in the air. It raised its huge fist and smashed it towards Crassus. "Playing with fire with me?" Crassus sneered. Then, he raised his right hand towards the flame giant. The flame giant's movements froze instantly. That fire element supreme magic caster held his magic staff. His face was flushed red, but the flame giant's body was still motionless. A sense of helplessness rose from the bottom of his heart. "Explode," Crassus said with a relaxed expression. The 100-meter-tall flame giant suddenly exploded. The flames scattered in all directions, turning the crazily growing trees on the ground into ashes. The fire element supreme magic caster and the wood element supreme magic caster turned pale at the same time. Their mental strength was severely damaged. On the other side, Julian and Helena were facing each other. An ice phoenix shuttled through the starry sky domain, freezing the burning stars into ice. Behind the ice phoenix, dozens of burning meteorites chased after it, trying to blast it into ashes. The addition of Crassus and Julian saved Meg from an unsolvable situation. However, the other party still had 9 supreme magic casters. After retreating, they still managed to stabilize the situation, and once again surrounded Meg and the rest. A golden dragon and a frost dragon flew over from the south. 200 thugs in suits stood on each dragon's back. The high priest pushed his sunglasses up and pointed ahead. "There are intense battle waves in front. I can feel the power of 10th tier. This should be our destination." Chapter 1263. Magic spells flew all over the sky, and clashed in the air with loud noises. Tens of thousands of elven guards were watching from afar. A battle of this level was not something they could participate in without a commander. The purple-striped griffins flew in the starry sky domain, but they were always forced back by the focus fire every time they tried to get close to the magic casters. Crassus was fighting 1 against 3, and his chest started to rise and fall slightly. He was still a little weak in a battle of this level at his age. On the other side, the Ice Phoenix was finally hit by a meteorite after destroying half of the stars in the starry sky domain, and turned into ice shards. Helena took a step back with a pale face. There was only a little starlight left in the starry sky crystal ball, but she sneered as she looked at Julian in midair. If the elves couldn't kill the 3 of them with all their powerhouses, it would be difficult for the elves to establish themselves on the Norland continent. Kill them, Helena ordered coldly. The hundreds of 8th tier and 9th tier powerhouses that had gathered charged toward the 3 trapped elves. When the scales of victory tilted towards the elves, these hundreds of 8th tier and 9th tier powerhouses would become the last iron rod that crushed them to death. Sally, who was standing not far behind Helena, clenched her fists again. She heaved a sigh of relief when Crassus and Julian appeared, but the situation was still developing in the worst direction. A sky full of magic spells flew toward the 3 of them like fireworks. 8th tier and 9th tier powerhouses were just children in front of 10th tier powerhouses. However, when enough children picked up their knives and attacked wildly, they could still kill a giant. All the elves' eyes lit up. The power of the elves was on full display at this moment. Hundreds of 8th tier and 9th tier powerhouses could blast any powerhouse into pieces when they worked together. Helena, this old witch, is really well prepared. Irina frowned. Her magic power was completely depleted, and she couldn't provide any help to them anymore. This is really a little troublesome. Julian flattened the sapling that popped out from the ground with 1 foot, still fearless. Meg looked at the sky full of magic spells with a slight frown. The timer in his eyes had entered the 60-second countdown, and he didn't have much time left. However, his men should be here by now, right? Roar! Right at this moment, a dragon's roar could be heard. A golden dragon and a frost dragon appeared in the sky above the mountain peak. For the glory of Lantist! Charge! The high priest raised the crystal ball in his hand high up, and shouted in Lantist. A vast ocean gushed out from the crystal ball, and turned into huge waves that welcomed the magic that filled the sky. Hundreds of thugs in suits wielded tridents and leapt off the dragon's back like dumplings. They stepped on the waves and charged fearlessly towards the hundreds of elves. Above the waves, 9 level, 10 powerhouses stood guard and began to cast spells, which were then channeled into the high priest's crystal ball. The crystal ball flashed, and a water screen appeared in front of Mag and the rest in the blink of an eye, calm. The water curtain shook violently. After withstanding the last magic attack, it dissipated and turned into a mist that filled the sky. Who are these people? Everyone present was dumbfounded when they saw those fellows in strange clothes with a black thing on their faces. However, they had to admit that the appearance of these thugs in suits was very impactful. Their neat black suits, black sunglasses, and cold expressions were very impactful. That water curtain that blocked all the magic attacks with ease made all the elves' eyelids twitch. Where did this group of powerhouses come from? The number of 10th tier powerhouses was not inferior to the number of 8th tier and 9th tier powerhouses in the Wind Forest. Who are these people? Helena's expression changed drastically. Victory was in sight, but this group of unknown powerhouses suddenly appeared. She was sure that this had nothing to do with the goblins stationed at the border. If the goblins had such a powerful force, they wouldn't be cowards. Who are these people? Irina was also confused. Although they looked like humans, they weren't from the Roth Empire. Moreover, they seemed to be on their side. "It's Mia, Gina, and Miss Elizabeth," Phyrus exclaimed in surprise as she looked up at the golden dragon and frost dragon in the sky. "It's them." Shirley nodded. Then, she looked at those thugs in suits, and her eyes lit up. "Then, these powerhouses should be from Lantist. Seems like this is also his arrangement." Although Irina didn't know what kind of power Lantist was, she already had her own judgment. 400 thugs in suits from Lantist stepped on the giant waves and collided with the elven powerhouses who were charging over. The giant waves messed up the elven powerhouses' formation. They didn't have time to cast their spells in the waves before they were knocked unconscious. They were obviously of similar strength and numbers, but after the elves were stopped at the front, their willpower crumbled instantly in the face of their ferocious opponents. Someone shouted, "Run!" Hundreds of elven powerhouses threw down their helmets and armor, and turned to flee. "Shrink the formation. Kill those who run." Helena shouted coldly as she crushed an 8th-tier elf. The fleeing elves were shocked, and quickly shrank in Helena's direction. Meanwhile, the other great magic casters also gave up on attacking Meg and the rest. Instead, they started to restrict the momentum of the thugs in suits who suddenly appeared. Finally, after the momentum of the waves stopped, they stopped those 400 powerhouses with the help of the dense forest, leaving behind a mess. The elves behind the dense forest panted heavily as they looked at those thugs in suits. Their hearts were filled with fear. These powerhouses of unknown origin were too terrifying when they charged. If not for the 10th-tier magic casters covering them, they didn't know how many of them would be left alive. "Who are you? Why are you attacking us elves?" Helena questioned loudly as she looked at the high priestess who was standing in the air with a grave expression. The number of powerhouses on the other side was similar to that of the elves, but she couldn't tell which race they belonged to. To the elves, this could be an evenly matched battle. The high priestess frowned slightly as she looked at Gina, who was standing beside her. Chapter 1264. 400 thugs in suits descended from the sky, and defeated the elves with a crushing force. This completely disrupted Helena's plan. The key was that Helena still couldn't determine where these 10 10th-tier powerhouses and hundreds of 8th-tier and 9th-tier powerhouses came from. If such a force existed on the Norland continent, she definitely would have heard about it. Could this be Alex's force? A dangerous thought appeared in her mind. Alex had been missing for 3 years, and no one knew where he went or who he interacted with. However, it was almost impossible to build such a huge force in 3 years. But now, she could confirm that they were indeed here for Irina. Their goal was to take the night elves away. Uneasiness rose in Helena's heart. Although they still had 9 great magic casters, hundreds of 8th-tier and 9th-tier powerhouses, and more than 20,000 elite guards on their side, they still had to face the night elves. Even if the elves won in the end, they would definitely suffer heavy losses if the other party fought to the death with them. The elves had already lost their queen and Borg consecutively, and Irina had openly betrayed them. If they were to lose their combat power today, the elves might not even be able to withstand the goblin chief who was stationed at the border if he were to march straight into the wind forest. And after a while, the peace talks would begin, and the elves, whose power had been greatly reduced, would lose their right to speak. This was something she couldn't accept. Helena looked at Irina on the mountain peak in the distance, and a tinge of unwillingness flashed across her eyes. Letting the tiger go back to the mountain would cause endless trouble in the future. However, she didn't have the chance to get rid of her today. What she had to consider now was how to preserve the elves' power to the greatest extent. This is. Sally was also looking at those powerful beings in suits with shock and bewilderment in her eyes. Their outfits were very much like Mag's style, and only he would have such a strange and impactful outfit. However, she had never seen these customers in Mamie restaurant before. However, she heaved a sigh of relief when she saw these people blocking the mountain peak. Today's war seemed to be coming to an end. Yo, I didn't expect Mr. Mac to have this trick up his sleeve. What a surprise. Crassus looked at those thugs in suits with surprise on his face. However, after seeing Yabamiya and Elizabeth, he could confirm whose men they were. He happily returned to the Red Dragon's back. Julian also kept his magic wand. Their goal had been achieved, and there was no need for them to do anything else. Meg made the purple-striped griffin fly higher. The 15-minute countdown was over, and the fatigue from overexerting his body. Luckily, he had a mask, and it wasn't easy to detect while he was on the griffin's back. He was very satisfied with the appearance of the 400 thugs in suits from Lantist. The visual effect of each wave being stronger than the previous one was also very outstanding. With the momentum of a surprise attack, they instantly turned the tide of the battle. 15 is Mamie's sis. 15 minutes was too short, and Julian and Crassus were obviously here to save Irina. It wasn't realistic for them to join forces to kill Helena now. As for the warriors of Lantist, Meg had promised them that he wouldn't force them to do anything dangerous. Fighting a bloody battle with the elves would definitely result in a lose-lose situation for Lantist. Furthermore, the warriors of Lantist were very powerful in the sea. Once they went ashore, they wouldn't have enough water elements, and their abilities would decrease as the battle dragged on. Meg rode the purple-striped griffin and looked down at Helena and the elves. He said in a deep voice, "Helena, this is your last chance to retreat. If you don't, I believe the goblins will be very willing to clean up the mess and take over the Wind Forest." The elves' expressions changed drastically. They had almost forgotten that the goblins had tens of thousands of soldiers waiting for them dozens of kilometers away. "High Priestess, we have already suffered heavy losses today. For the future of the Wind Forest, let's retreat today," a great magic caster said softly with fear in his eyes. Helena's expression was cold. She took a deep look at Irina, and loudly said, "The Wind Forest will remember what happened today. We will repay you tenfold in the future. Retreat." Following Helena's command, the elven army began to retreat. However, they were no longer as orderly and imposing as they were when they attacked the underground cavern. They threw away their armor and fled north. They were obviously scared out of their wits. Sally looked towards the mountain peak, and Shirley's gaze also landed on her. Their gazes met, and they nodded slightly. Then, she turned around and followed Helena to retreat. The tens of thousands of elven guards retreated in the blink of an eye, leaving only corpses and ice sculptures on the ground, as well as the tragic traces left behind by the previous battle. "We won." The remaining hundreds of night elves cheered loudly on the mountain peak. Although they were covered in blood and almost exhausted, they were very excited. Although they relied on the help of reinforcements from the outside world, they were still the ones who won this battle. It played a crucial role in the history of the Night Elves' resistance. "We won." A smile also appeared on Irina's face. However, when her gaze landed on the dead elven soldiers and the elves who were turned into ice sculptures below, there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. In the war, the ones who died the most were still the elven soldiers at the bottom of the hierarchy. However, those exploiters were still alive and well. Meg heaved a sigh of relief as he watched the elves leave. If Helena had fought to the end without regard for anything, then it would be unknown how many people would be able to leave this place alive. This result had already exceeded his expectations. He was very satisfied. Z turned around and flew towards the mountain peak. Two great magic casters from Lantist blocked his path with nervous expressions. "Gina, he's one of us." Elizabeth shouted at Gina. She looked at Alex with a complicated gaze. She didn't expect to see him here again. However, there were some questions that she was destined to not have the chance to ask because the female lead today was Irina. Gina hurriedly made the two great magic casters move aside to prevent any accidental injuries. She was also sizing up the man who was riding a strange steed curiously. "Is that Alex? Wow, he looks so cool wearing a mask. And his steed is so handsome. It's purple, and it has super dazzling patterns." Yabamiya had already turned into a fangirl with stars in her eyes. Meg rode the purple-striped griffin and landed on the mountain peak. Then, he reached out his hand to Irina. "I'll bring you away." Irina looked at Meg with a smile on her face. However, she didn't reach out to take his hand. Instead, she shook her head slightly. "They need me. I can't leave yet." Meg looked at the elderly night elves. Almost all of them were injured. He couldn't help but feel a little sad when he thought of how they had defeated an enemy 10 times their size. He nodded and said, "All right, I'll wait for you." Meg patted Ozzy's back gently. The purple-striped griffin flapped its wings and flew towards the west. Calm. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1265. Meg leaped onto the griffin's back and let out a long sigh of relief after the griffin left the underground cave. He was so tired that he didn't even want to move his fingers. A real man for 15 minutes was indeed unbearable. However, other than exhaustion, he didn't feel any other side effects. This was also one of the uniqueness of the system. He asked Ozzy to send him back to the 9th peak where he had parted ways with Gina and the others, and told it to come back and pick up Irina and the others. Then, he found a place to return the clothes and climbed onto the bald eagle that was shivering on the ground. He laid on its warm and soft back and closed his eyes to rest. The siege of the night elves was successfully resolved. It went smoother than he had expected. However, Mag had sensed an unusual aura and power from Borg's body when he had killed him. Furthermore, he could clearly sense that Irina's holy light seemed to have a suppressive effect on that aura, which was why he had been able to kill that skeletal winged tiger so easily. "System, what's on Borg's body? Why do you want me to kill him?" Meg asked in his heart. This was the first time that the system had issued a killing mission. Moreover, the other party didn't seem to have anything to do with cooking. This person's existence has seriously affected the quality of the rice in the wind forest. It may also threaten the production of shiitake mushrooms, causing the fertile land in the wind forest to be polluted. Although the system has already dealt with it, this person must be eradicated as a source of pollution, the system answered. A source of pollution. Meg frowned. He still didn't understand the system's words. That's the black fog that doesn't belong to this world. It's extremely corrosive to any living being. According to the system's detection, the black fog of the same origin has appeared in many places on this continent. It's expanding rapidly and has already threatened many farms of the system. Although the system has already carried out many rounds of cleanup, the black fog is too stubborn and has shown signs of developing drug resistance. In order to protect the farms and ranches, the host must go and clean up the black fog. At the same time, the mission line of traveling around the continent will be activated. Do you still want to save face? As a system, you can't even protect your own farms and ranches. Meg pursed his lips, but he was still a little wary of the sudden black fog. Something that could make the system helpless was definitely not easy to deal with. Due to the tense situation earlier, Meg did not have time to look at the rewards carefully. Now that he was resting, he clicked on the rewards that had not been announced earlier. Mobile restaurant, upgraded version of the restaurant. Equipped with a flying thruster, the entire restaurant can move in flight. In flight mode, the highest speed can reach Mach 5, the catacombs. The elves had retreated, and the merfolk of Lantist had also dispelled their battle mode. They regrouped and waited to be airlifted home. "Thanks, old man. I'll treat you to a drink next time," Irina said as she looked at Crassus and Julian on the dragon's back. She was grateful and touched. "Then I won't hold back. However, Alex is really rude. He ran away without saying a word," Crassus said with a smile. "Do you think everyone is as shameless as you?" Julian mocked in a hoarse voice. However, he looked at Irina with a gentle gaze, and a smile appeared on his cold face. "Ha! Looks like you want to fight with me," Crassus said with an unfriendly expression. "Do I need to choose a day to fight with you?" Julian asked with a cold smile. "My two masters. Can we go back now?" The red dragon said, wanting to cry. He was afraid that these two big bosses would fight with him. If that happened, he would not be able to survive. The two of them looked down at the red dragon at the same time. The red dragon shut up immediately. His eyes flashed with resentment. "Do whatever you want. Don't bother about me." Crassus looked at the frozen elves, and pursed his lips. "Ice old man, you'd better ask Irina if those fellows you froze still need. They will really die in a while. They're not dead yet." Irina's eyes lit up. "There are about 1,000 elves. They're still alive." Julian nodded. "Then please defrost them all," Irina said hurriedly. "But, Your Highness, they're here to attack us. Wouldn't it be bad if we let them go?" Phyllis asked in bewilderment. The other night elves were also confused. They had sacrificed hundreds of their companions to win this battle. Now, they had to save these enemies. What is the philosophy of the night elves? It's to unite all forces, overthrow the rule of the exploiting classes, and build a new free kingdom. Irina looked at the night elves. These are all low-level elven soldiers. Most of them are slaves. They are elves who were captured by the demons from all over the continent and brought back to the forest. In this war, they are just like us. They are victims. Those exploiters are still watching this war from above. They don't care how many low-level elves die in this war. What the night elves want to do is not to massacre the wind forest. Instead, we want to overthrow the class rulers and use violence against the oppressors to gain more support from the low-level elves. If we slaughter these soldiers today, will there be any soldiers willing to join us in the future? Will there be any elves who will believe us? The night elves were silent as they pondered over Irina's words. Many of them were captured by the demons and suffered all kinds of torture. They were not selected to join the army because they were too old and became slaves. They knew how difficult it was for the low-level elves to survive. Your Highness is right. The young elves are the future of the forest. If these young elves are willing to join the night elves, our revolutionary team will be strengthened. Only then will we have more hope to overthrow the rule of the wind forest, a night elf who had lost an arm said loudly. The other night elves nodded. The night elves had suffered heavy losses in this siege. If they could inject new blood, it would undoubtedly be a good thing for the night elves. Julian saw that everyone had reached an agreement. He waved his magic wand, and those human-shaped ice sculptures shattered instantly. The pale-faced elves collapsed onto the ground, panting heavily with fear on their faces. The wind forest had sent out all their elites, but they were defeated in the end. Furthermore, it was a crushing defeat, leaving them here. Meanwhile, those elves who had been knocked unconscious by the Lantistians were all awakened by the cold water splashing on them. They quickly realized what had happened when they saw that there were only those terrifying men in black and night elves left. Their faces were also pale. You don't have to panic. I won't kill you. Irina stood at the edge of the mountain peak, and looked at the elves. The wind forest has already abandoned you. In their eyes, you are already dead. Now, you have two choices. One is to join the Night Elves and overthrow the rule of the Wind Forest with us, and build a free kingdom for the rest of your lives. The other is to leave on your own. Chaos City is now open to all elves and provides shelter. You can live a peaceful life there. Calm. Wonderful book house. Calm. Chapter 1266. 10 kilometers south of the border between the Wind Forest and the underground cavern, tens of thousands of goblin soldiers were on standby. A middle-aged goblin in golden armor whose head was twice as big as a normal goblin stood on a high platform and looked toward the north with a bewildered expression. Although he was over 10 kilometers away from the battlefield, the intense magic wave from before still made him a little fearful. If only Alex came to help the Night Elves, why would there be such an intense magic wave? Could it be that the Night Elves wanted to surround and kill Alex as well? Even if that was the case, there shouldn't be such an intense magic wave. But on the Norland continent, who would be willing to offend the entire elven race for the Night Elves? Chief, the Wind Forest's allied army has retreated in defeat. Right at this moment, a goblin popped his head out of the cave and shouted loudly. The Wind Forest has retreated in defeat. The goblin chief was shocked. How is that possible? All the goblin soldiers were shocked when they heard that. The Wind Forest had sent an allied army of 20,000 to 30,000 to besiege the Night Elves, and the Night Elves only had 3,000 old, weak, women, and children. How could the Wind Forest have retreated in defeat with such an overwhelming difference in strength? Apart from Alex, who else came? The goblin chief quickly asked. This result was too abnormal, and it was destined to shake the Norland continent. There's also the Lord of Fire Crassus and the Lord of Ice Julian, and... That goblin was a little anxious, but he didn't know what to say. I didn't expect the Lord of Fire and the Lord of Ice to come too. The goblin chief was slightly shocked. The abilities of these two great magic casters were enough to be ranked among the most powerful people on the continent. Even with them on the Night Elf side, they couldn't stop the elites of the elven race. How could the elves have retreated in defeat? And what? The goblin chief asked nervously as he suddenly realized something. It seemed like a certain force had participated in this battle, and that was why the outcome of this battle had changed. And a group of mysterious people who suddenly appeared. They were wearing black clothes, and their eyes were covered by two black discs. They descended from the sky and crushed the elites of the elven race. After that, the allied army of the elven race retreated to the Wind Forest in defeat. That goblin tried his best to describe the scene he had seen earlier. What kind of race is this? The gnome tribe leader was confused. I don't know. They don't look like humans, demons, or elves. They can't be demons or trolls, that goblin said innocently. If he could tell what race they were, he wouldn't have described it like that. This power was indeed mysterious. They could actually hide on the Norland continent for such a long time. If they suddenly descended upon the goblins would have no way to fight back. Thus, he immediately ordered, "Go and find out where this power came from." Yes. A few goblins obeyed the order, and jumped into the hole nearby. The ice and snow melted. The captured elven soldiers looked at each other with hesitation and struggle in their eyes. Submit to Chaos City and live a comfortable life, or join the Night Elves and fight for freedom. This was not an easy choice for them who had lost their dignity and freedom for many years. Irina stood at the edge of the mountain peak. She didn't urge them to make a choice. Instead, she looked at the elves quietly and waited for them to make their choice. My daughter was killed by those beasts. I want to avenge her personally. A middle-aged elf walked out and knelt down on one knee. He lowered his head, and loudly said, I am willing to join the Night Elves and follow Her Highness to overthrow the rule of the Wind Forest. My parents were killed by the demon mercenaries in order to protect me. I am willing to join the Night Elves and avenge them. A youth said with clenched teeth as he knelt down on one knee. I am willing to join the Night Elves and fight for freedom. One by one, the elves stood out and knelt down on one knee, choosing to join the Night Elves. Fight for freedom. Inspiring slogans could be heard all over the mountain. All the elves chose to join the Night Elves. No matter if it was for revenge or for freedom, they still chose to resist. Fight for freedom. Irina also raised her clenched right fist. Is this Princess Irina? She is so beautiful, and her aura is so strong. She is just like a queen. Yabamiya looked at Irina with amazement and envy. Even though she had become a golden dragon, she still couldn't learn such an aura. Elizabeth was silent, and there was also a hint of envy in her eyes as she looked at Irina. When they were still working hard on their cultivation, Irina was already standing at the top of the entire continent and had the courage to challenge a powerful race. Princess Irina and Sir Alex are really a perfect match. I wonder if I will have the chance to see them again in the future. Today, when they stretched out their hands, my girlish heart exploded. Yabamiya started to be infatuated again. She is so cool. Barbara also looked at Irina with amazement. She was also a princess, but at this moment, she deeply felt the difference between her and this beautiful and powerful elven princess. Is the Moon Nation equal? Does it also need freedom? Barbara held her chin and fell into deep thought. This woman is truly terrifying. Should I withdraw as well? Camilla looked at Irina with fear. She suddenly remembered the day she was sent flying with a stool. But why was she there? What was the relationship between her and Meg? Let's go. The little girl has already grown up. Seems like she doesn't need us two old men anymore, Crassus said with a gratified smile. Let's go, Julian also said coldly. Please sit tight, sirs. We will leave now. That red dragon was relieved, and immediately flapped its wings to escape. Irina waved her hand with a smile, and said, I owe you some wine. I will pay you back next time. We will be waiting. The voice flew away together with the red dragon. Irina turned to look at Yabamiya and the Lantistians, and said gratefully, and everyone, on behalf of the Night Elves, I thank you for coming to our rescue. You are welcome. We are here to save Phyllis and Shirley. They are our friends. Yabamiya waved her hand, feeling flattered. Also, this is Boss' idea. Boss is so nice. He actually put in so much effort to rescue us from me. Phyllis was touched. Chapter 1267. Upon hearing Yabamiya's words, Irina's lips curled up slightly. After experiencing some things, he had indeed changed. He was more considerate, and was no longer the man who only believed in the sword in his hand. However, when her gaze landed on Yabamiya, Elizabeth, and the rest of the ladies, her beautiful eyebrows raised slightly. These ladies were really beautiful. It was indeed the same as before. Even if he hid his identity and power, there would still be a group of beautiful ladies around him. Luckily, I'm more beautiful than them. Isn't this the bat that he tied up previously? Why is she here too? Could it be that he has feelings for her after tying her up? Irina's gaze stopped on Camilla, and her eyes narrowed slightly. I've been discovered. Camilla was shocked, and instantly felt uneasy. So many people were watching. Was she going to embarrass herself? Irina retracted her gaze from Camilla. She didn't feel that her position was threatened. Anyway, Meg couldn't defeat her now. If he really dared to have any ideas, hee. You're welcome. Gina also shook her head on behalf of Lantist. She looked at those severely injured night elves, and exchanged a few words with the high priest. Then, she looked at Irina and said, "Do you need help?" Treatment. Looking at the puzzled Irina, Yabamiya quickly translated for her. Gina doesn't really know how to speak the common language, but she should be asking if she needs help to treat those injured elves. If it's possible, then please. Irina's eyes lit up. She had used up all her magic now, and couldn't cast any healing spells. Gina understood Irina's words, and said a few words to the high priest. The high priest nodded slightly, and then tossed out the crystal ball in his hand. Streaks of clear, ice-blue water flew out from the crystal ball, and washed over the night elves. The blood on their bodies was instantly washed clean, and the arrows and stones that were stuck in their bodies were taken away. The horrible wounds started to heal at a speed visible to the naked eye. In a few breaths' time, the wounds on the thousands of night elves had already healed. Although their broken bodies couldn't be reborn, the pain was gone, and the elves' faces were filled with joy. "Thank you," Irina said solemnly. The high priest and Gina exchanged a few words. "This is our promise to Mr. Meg. If you want to thank someone, thank him," Gina said with a smile. "I'll thank him properly." A smile appeared on Irina's face. "We should go." Gina turned to look at Yabamiya and Elizabeth. Lantist should not be exposed too much. "Phyllis, Shirley, are you going back to Amy's with us?" Yabamiya asked Phyllis and Shirley. "Anna mentioned you a few times." "She must be missing you," Yabamiya said to Shirley. Shirley's lips moved. Looking at Irina's back view, she eventually shook her head. Phyllis was a little tempted, but she shook her head firmly as she looked at Irina. Irina looked at Shirley and Phyllis and said, "You two go first. I will go to Chaos City to look for you. The night elves will recuperate and grow in Chaos City." Phyllis's and Shirley's eyes lit up. In that case, they could go back to work at Amy's again. Yabamiya and Elizabeth transformed into giant dragons again, and carried the Lantist warriors, Phyllis and Shirley, to the south. Camilla also quickly picked up Barbara and followed. It was too dangerous to stay behind alone. If she had known this would happen, she wouldn't have come today. She didn't do anything, but she felt like she was being watched. Although she liked pretty big sisters, and Irina was indeed very beautiful, she was too strong, and she liked to be the one who took the initiative. After everyone left, Irina looked at the elves and said, "The night elves are not strong enough. We need to find a safer place to grow. Hence, I have decided to lead the night elves down south and enter Chaos City in small groups. We will build a new base in Chaos City and find a chance to counterattack the Wind Forest. Chief, the mysterious man has left on a dragon. We don't know where he went. Over 1,000 night elves are heading down south. Should we stop them?" The two pieces of news quickly reached the Goblin Chief. The Goblin Chief pondered for a while, and then said in a deep voice, "There's no need to continue tracking them. There's no need to continue tracking the whereabouts of the mysterious man, lest we anger them. Prepare 1,000 good horses for the night elves and let them go down south. Big Sister Cece, when will Father and the rest come back? They went to beat up the bad guys. Will they be in danger?" Amy asked Cece worriedly as she hugged Ugly Duckling in Amy's. Anna, who was lying on the counter, sat up straight and looked at Cece nervously. "Don't worry. Mr. Mac and the rest will be fine. They will be back soon," Cece said gently. There was a hint of worry in her eyes. Although she didn't know what Mr. Mac and the rest had gone to do, it seemed to be something dangerous. Otherwise, they wouldn't have left the two little fellows in the restaurant. "Don't worry, Anna. Father will bring big sister Shirley and the rest back. Amy walked to Anna's side and held her little hand gently. Meow. Ugly Duckling also reached out its chubby little hand and placed it on Anna's hand. Ugly Duckling, your fat paws are too heavy, Amy said with disdain. Anna looked at Ugly Duckling's chubby little pink paws and smiled. Meg, who had rested on the bald eagle's back for a long time, turned over. After chewing a few American ginseng, the emptiness in his body was finally filled up. Calculating the time, it was about time for them to return, so he jumped down from the bald eagle's back. He stroked the bald eagle's head, which was as arrogant as a puppy, and comforted it. Soon, 2 giant dragons, one gold and one silver, appeared in the sky. Boss, we did it. We brought Phyllis and Shirley back, Yabamiya said excitedly as she landed on the mountain peak and let Phyllis and Shirley down. Thank you, boss, Phyllis said to Meg with a blushing face. Thank you. Shirley also expressed her gratitude to Meg. If the people from the restaurant hadn't arrived in time today, they probably wouldn't have been able to leave the cave alive. We're all on the same side. It's good that you're back. Meg waved his hand with a smile. Then, he looked at the high priest of the Mare people, and thanked him. Thank you for your help. You're welcome, Mr. Meg. This is our promise. The high priest nodded slightly. In this operation, only a few Mare people warriors were slightly injured. Meg's request wasn't too much. It was much easier than he expected. Mia, Elizabeth, send them back to Lantist first, Meg said to the 2 of them. The 2 giant dragons flew in the southwest direction. Only Meg, Phyllis, Shirley, Barbara, and Camilla were left on the mountain peak. This bald eagle can only carry 2 people. Who wants to ride with me? Meg asked the ladies. Me. Chapter 1268. Chaos City, the City Lord's Castle, in the study. What's going on? Michael looked at the secret, urgent letter in his hand in shock. You saw it too. Roland barged in, and closed the door after seeing the secret letter in Michael's hand and his expression. How did this happen? Where did that group of mysterious people come from? They actually defeated the Wind Forest. Michael was still in disbelief. Even if all the high-end combat power in Chaos City were to bet, they might not be able to do that. What shocked him even more was that Chaos City had no news of such a powerful force before this. They didn't even know of their existence. The information that the Great Temple received was more comprehensive. Roland took out a secret letter and passed it to Michael. He continued, Alex indeed went to the underground cavern to rescue the Night Elves. The Wind Forest was already prepared. They sent out 10 great magic casters to besiege Alex, and tried to kill him and Irina together. Alex killed Borg in the midst of the siege, and there were signs of him being surrounded. Crassus and Julian joined the battle, and the elves had the advantage in numbers. After that team of mysterious people appeared. Under the lead of the 10 great magic casters, they defeated the Wind Forest's powerful team, and announced that they were here to rescue and protect the Night Elves. Julian and Crassus have always been on good terms with Irina. They almost took her in as their disciple back then. I just didn't expect them to go against the Wind Forest, Michael said in surprise. Although these 2 old fellows are old, their way of doing things hasn't changed. Moreover, the 2 of them are together, which is enough to make any force wary. They are also a ticking time bomb in Chaos City. We have to be careful at all times. Roland nodded with a slight headache. Let's not bother about Crassus and Julian for now. But where did that group of mysterious people come from? The sudden appearance of such a powerful race on the eve of the peace talks between the various races might make things worse for the peace talks. Michael frowned. Although there were many details of the battle in this secret letter, he still couldn't make an accurate judgment of the identity of those mysterious people. This matter still needs some time to investigate, but the report mentioned that those mysterious people arrived on a golden dragon and a frost dragon. This might be a direction for the investigation. Roland shook his head slightly. This matter was indeed a little strange, but at present, it seemed that there was still a direction to investigate. Other than that, what do you think of the Night Elves heading south? Burke is dead, and Irina set up the Night Elves to openly oppose the Wind Forest. Furthermore, they defeated the Wind Forest in this catacomb siege. The elves' vitality has been greatly damaged. They may choose to maintain the status quo in this peace negotiation, focusing on eliminating the Night Elves and recuperating. Roland thought for a moment and said, I think we should secretly accept the Night Elves into the city and provide them with the necessary help. The strengthening of the Night Elves can absorb the Wind Forest's desire to expand. This is a good thing for the peace of the Norland continent. Helena's actions are too extreme. She forcefully turned the Wind Forest into a feudal kingdom, and made the elves fight for fame and fortune like humans. If Irina's Night Elves can succeed, this is also a good thing. Michael nodded. In the Roth Empire, the king and the ministers were having a meeting in the meeting hall. The second prince, Josh, was among them, but he looked a little absent-minded and anxious. The encirclement of the Night Elves by the Wind Forest gave him a headache. Although he had repeatedly contacted Helena and Burke through letters, he couldn't get their promise that they wouldn't harm Irina, nor did they agree to hand Irina over to him. Today was the day the Wind Forest launched their final attack on the Night Elves. Although he had promised Burke last night that he would support him to become the Elven King if Irina didn't die and was delivered to him, he didn't receive Burke's reply. He didn't know what the situation was like now. If the king hadn't asked him to stay, he would have gone to the Wind Forest personally. A guard quickly came to the door and respectfully said, Your Majesty, urgent report. Present it. King Andre took the secret letter and read it personally. After a while, he let out a soft gasp. The ministers looked at each other. They didn't know what could make His Majesty so shocked, but no one dared to ask. Josh also looked at Andre nervously. He had a feeling that this urgent report was most likely related to the Night Elves and Irina. After a while, Andre put down the secret letter in his hand, and said to the ministers, The Wind Forest's encirclement of the Night Elves has been repelled. The meeting hall was silent for a moment, and then there was an uproar. Although the ministers had tried their best to control their emotions, they still couldn't hide the shock in their hearts. The difference in power between the Wind Forest and the Night Elves was like that between a giant dragon and an ant. They had mentioned this before, but such an obvious outcome didn't arouse the ministers' interest. They all said that the Wind Forest would be able to completely annihilate the Night Elves today. However, this outcome gave them a loud slap in the face. How is this possible? The Prime Minister was shocked. If that's the case, Irina shouldn't be dead. Josh was elated. Although he was also shocked by this outcome, it had completely exceeded his expectations. Alex killed Burke, Andre continued. The meeting hall quietened down instantly. The ministers were shocked by Alex's power, but they kept their expressions and kept quiet out of fear. During this period of time, Alex had been a taboo in the Roth Empire's officialdom. No one denied his power and greatness. It was just that he was once the pride of the Roth Empire, the number one in the military, and no longer belonged to the Roth Empire. He might even be standing on the opposite side of the empire. Furthermore, the elves were the Roth Empire's stable allies. As the commander of the elves' military, Burke had died in Alex's hands today. This was also a loss to the Roth Empire. Did Alex save her again? This fellow is indeed as detestable as before. Josh clenched his fists. This was undoubtedly the outcome that he didn't want to hear the most. It was even worse than Irina dying in the chaos. Apart from Alex, Julian and Crassus also appeared at the same time, as well as a group of powerful and mysterious people, Andre said calmly as he glanced at Josh. Powerful and mysterious people. All the ministers were shocked. What kind of mysterious people could make the king use the word powerful to describe them? The outcome is a little unexpected, but it doesn't have much impact on the Roth Empire. Let's investigate the background of those mysterious people. Perhaps there are still things in this world that we don't know, Andre said in a low voice as he placed the secret letter on the table. Chapter 1269. Irina accepted the 1,000 fine horses from the goblins, and expressed her gratitude to the goblin chief. Although the goblins didn't contribute to the night elves in the previous war, at least they didn't kick the night elves when they were down. Furthermore, they provided the underground cavern for free previously, and even gave them horses to go south now. They were already doing their best for the night elves. Chief, the night elves are also elves. If they become stronger, will they be more difficult to deal with than the wind forest? A goblin asked worriedly as he watched the night elves leave. We goblins and elves have been neighbors for 1,000 years, and this neighbor has only turned bad in the past 100 years. It's all because of that old hag Helena. If Irina can really make the elves return to how they used to be, it will only be a good thing for us goblins. The goblin chief shook his head with a smile as he looked in the direction where the night elves left. With the support of Alex and that mysterious power, Irina's counterattack on the wind forest would probably begin soon. If the goblins provided timely help, they might even have another ally in the future. With the fine horses to ride, the night elves' speed increased tremendously instantly. Howl! Right at this moment, a loud cry came from above their heads. A purple-striped griffin was circling above the night elves as it stared at the leader, Irina. Z. Irina looked up at the purple-striped griffin in surprise. Captain Ashley stepped forward with a smile, and said, "Your Highness, you can leave first. I will lead the night elves to Chaos City, and find a good place to set up camp." Irina looked at Ashley. This loyal captain had outstanding talent in managing the army, and she had 9th-tier power. Among the night elves now, she was second only to her. "All right. I will look for you when we reach Chaos City." Irina nodded, and leaped onto a huge rock at the side from the horse's back. The purple-striped griffin swooped down, and landed beside the huge rock. It extended its wings onto the rock so that Irina could walk on it easily. "Little Z, come over and let me touch your head," Irina said with a smile as she wasn't in a hurry to get on the griffin's back. Howl! Z shrunk its head back instinctively, and whimpered as it looked at Irina nervously. "You won't die from a touch. Why are you so petty?" Irina's voice turned cold. "Or do you think you can't touch your head now that you're all grown?" Meow! The purple-striped griffin was instantly terrified. It immediately stuck its head out and allowed Irina to ravage it. Although it refused at the start, when Irina placed her hand on Z's head, the purple-striped griffin with a wingspan of over 100 meters rolled all over the ground like a kitten. It even flipped over, revealing its stomach, and looked at Irina fawningly with its tongue out. Irina retracted her hand from Z's head, and kicked Z's stomach gently with the tip of her foot. She smiled and said, "Let's go. Bring me back to Chaos City. I haven't seen my little Amy for a long time. I miss her so much." Howl! Z flipped over, and shook off the dust on its body. When Irina got on its back, it flapped its wings, and suddenly soared into the sky, piercing through the clouds, and flying towards the south. "Big sister Cece, I think father should be back soon," Amy probed as she looked at Cece, who was busy in the kitchen. They might be back for lunch." But I'd better make something for you two first, Cece replied without turning back. It's all right. We're not hungry at all. We can wait for Father and the rest to come back and eat together. Amy shook her head. Then, she tugged at Anna's sleeve gently. Don't you think so, Anna? Anna glanced at Amy, and then at Cece in the kitchen. She nodded and said, I'm not hungry either. You have to eat even if you're not hungry. You're still growing. If you don't eat on time, you won't grow tall, Cece said firmly as she shook her head. It's all right. I like to be small like big sister Barbara. I'm not tall, and I'm so cute. Amy blinked. I want to be like big sister Shirley. I want to be tall and skinny. Anna thought for a while, and then shook her head. But it's all right to eat later today. I want to wait for them to come back and eat together. Cece turned back to look at the two of them, and helplessly said, I say, although the food I make isn't as delicious as Mr. Max, the two of you should at least give me some face. Amy and Anna shrugged at the same time, while Ugly Duckling turned its head away. Knock, knock. Right at this moment, there was a knock on the door. Are they back? Anna jumped up from her chair, and dashed towards the door. That's great. Amy's eyes also lit up. She picked up Ugly Duckling and ran towards the door. Anna stood on her tiptoes and pushed open the door with some difficulty. She was stunned when she saw Shirley standing at the door. Her hair, which was usually neatly combed, was a little messy. Her beautiful dress had become a light armor full of holes. There was a lot of blood on her body. She didn't know if it was hers or someone else's. Anna's eyes reddened immediately. I'm back. A smile appeared on Shirley's face. She took out the little rabbit that Anna asked Phyllis to bring her. The white rabbit was already stained red with blood. Anna dashed over immediately, and jumped into Shirley's arms as she sobbed. Shirley hugged Anna gently, and then hugged her tightly in her arms. Her tense nerves seemed to have finally relaxed at this moment. Big Sister Bean Sprout, Big Sister Shirley, Big Sister Camilla, you're back. Amy exclaimed in surprise. She looked around again, and worriedly asked, where's Father and Big Sister Mia? They're still behind. They should be back soon, Phyllis replied. She felt very close to being called Big Sister Bean Sprout by Amy. It felt great to be back at Mamie's again. If the night elves were to set up camp in Chaos City, then she could go back to work at Mamie's again. That's great. We'll have lunch now, Amy said happily. Seems like I won't be able to showcase my culinary skills this afternoon, Cece said regretfully as she glanced at the ingredients that she had already washed. Oh, yes. Where's Big Sister Aisha? Why didn't she come back with you? Amy asked after some thought. Anna also lifted her head from Shirley's arms with a look of concern. Shirley let go of Anna, and held her little hand as she said, she won't be back for the time being, but I think she'll definitely come back. Chapter 1270. Boss, I suggest you change the seat of this bald eagle. It's not very practical, Meg said with a smile after he received the deposit from the beast tamer. It might not be practical for others, but isn't it good for you and your wife? The beast tamer glanced at Barbara with a chuckle. However, he was cursing Meg in his heart. How could he do that to such a young lady? Barbara blushed. If Meg's hand wasn't behind her, telling her to calm down, she would have kicked this stinky fellow and that stupid bird away. That makes sense. I'll look for you again when I'm going out next time. Meg smiled as he pulled Barbara's sleeve, and walked into Chaos City. Everything went smoothly today, and he even killed that old Borg. He was in a good mood. The night elf's problem was solved, and the elves lost their confidence to fight for the Norland continent. It was a small contribution to world peace. Furthermore, he received a new reward from the system, a restaurant that could fly. Its speed wasn't 80 miles per hour, but Mach 5. This speed was far beyond the speed limit of the world's top fighter jets in his previous life. Meg couldn't help but look forward to what the flying fortress looked like. According to the system, the flying restaurant existed independently, and wasn't remodeled from the original restaurant. The system was managing it temporarily, and he could request for it to be used when he needed it. This is really a good tool for a holiday. Meg thought to himself as he began to plan for his next holiday. Perhaps he could bring the restaurant staff and his good friends to the sunny beach in the south to bask in the sun, enjoy the sea breeze, and have a beach barbecue. Host, the flying restaurant is an important place for the host's growth. It's also a divine tool for opening a restaurant in a foreign land quickly. Please don't treat it as a simple aircraft. That's a serious blasphemy to the flying restaurant, the system warned. Mamie's is doing well, so why should I open a restaurant elsewhere? Isn't that neglecting the essentials? In the process of gaining popularity, other than earning less money, it can't improve my cooking skills. Meg pursed his lips, disagreeing with the system's words. A true god of cooking will not be confined to one place and be a frog in a well. Only by cooking 10,000 dishes and traveling 10,000 miles can one become a true god of cooking. I hope the host can understand this principle, the system said earnestly. All right, tell me, when are you leaving? Meg raised his eyebrows. When he heard the system's nonsense, he felt that things were not as simple as they seemed. He might really have to go somewhere else. As for the black fog that the system had mentioned earlier, he was rather concerned about it. There was clearly something wrong with the death aura emanating from Borg's body. If it weren't for Irina's holy light, he wouldn't have been able to slay that black tiger and kill Borg. An aura that didn't belong to this world, yet it eroded all living beings. To this world, it probably didn't just affect the system's cooking. The system will continue to monitor the black fog. If physical methods are still unable to control it effectively, the host will need to go to the farm and ranch to clear the black fog. The time will be at least 1 week later. The time limit is not set. It will depend on the host's efficiency, the system said. Speaking of which, if I help you clear the black fog, it's also considered working for you, right? How will the salary be calculated? Meg raised his eyebrows. Host, you're wrong to say that. How can this be considered working for me? This is to maintain the supply chain of Mamie's ingredients. It's not working for the system. I don't care. When we meet the black fog, we'll calculate it according to its volume. For every cubic centimeter that I clear, you'll pay me 1 copper coin. This price is very fair, right? That's a black fog that even a great and powerful system like you can't deal with. Speaking of which, it seems to make sense. That black fog is indeed very stubborn, and its drug resistance is getting stronger and stronger. Even the system, which has existed for 500 million years, can't completely clear it. The system muttered, seeming to be a little shaken. Then it settled. Meg turned into a side alley and pulled off the beard on his face and the loose robe on his body. Barbara also took off her veil and cloak and put them into the bag that Meg passed to her. She returned to her usual attire. Do you know the leader of the night elves today? That super beautiful princess? Barbara asked curiously as she followed Meg out of the alley. She quickened her pace and walked side by side with Meg. She came to the restaurant for a meal. Meg nodded. Barbara's eyes lit up, and she asked expectantly, then will she come to Mamie's today? Phyllis and Shirley are both back. She seems to have a good relationship with them. I'm not sure about that. You seem to be looking forward to her arrival. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly and looked at Barbara in surprise. Z had already gone to pick up Irina. She would naturally come to the restaurant today, but it shouldn't be during the day. Of course, I like her a lot. Barbara immediately nodded, her eyes filled with little stars of adoration. Don't tell me. Meg's eyes revealed some vigilance, and he said hesitantly, Camilla didn't do anything to you on the way, right? She lifted me by the collar and flew around. I was about to turn into a dog from the cold. Barbara rolled her eyes and didn't want to recall that memory. She said excitedly, you didn't see it. That princess was super cool, just like a queen. Everyone wanted to submit to her. Perhaps that's the case. Meg nodded slightly with a smile on his lips. It seemed to be quite satisfying to hear others praise his wife like that. You don't have to think about it. Her man is a super powerful knight. He rode a cool purple-striped griffin to save her. Although his face couldn't be seen, he must be a very tall and mighty man. Barbara clenched her fists in front of her chest, as if she was still immersed in the scene of that knight reaching out his hand to Irina. Then, she looked up at Meg and sighed. Compared to him, you are still far behind. Yeah, I can't compare. Meg nodded in agreement. He really couldn't compare to himself. However, it seemed that Irina was indeed very charming. She could make Barbara, who always tried her best to play the role of a tsundere, become a little fangirl. She was a little cute. Barbara glanced at Meg, and seemed to feel that her words were a little harsh. She coughed dryly, and said, I mean, compared to him, you are indeed far behind him. But compared to ordinary men, you are still okay. After saying that, Barbara added, of course, I want to reiterate that this doesn't mean that I like you. Yeah, I don't like children either. Meg patted Barbara's head lightly, and strode away with a smile. Humph. I'm not a child. I'm already a woman. Barbara looked at Meg's back and stomped her feet in annoyance. She looked down at her chest, and muttered, they are already so big. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.